23. And are we live? Can I be doing this?
Madam Chair, I believe, yes, we are live.
Okay, fantastic. So again, calling to order the Finance Committee for January 3rd, 2023, the first meeting of the year. If we could get a roll call, that'd be great.
Madam Chair, we typically get the live little icon on our iPads and I don't see that.
Okay, let's double check. Do you,
Madam Chair, it shows as live for me on the screen. Let me double check with our technical support.
Yes, we're live.
Okay.
Yes, we're live.
okay, you're not, are you showing it yet, Counselor?
I just tried to refresh.
I just refreshed mine. Mine doesn't say live, but
Mine doesn't.
I also don't have internet, so I don't know if that makes a difference.
Well, if they say we're live, I guess we're live. So. Is it?
All right,
We are live.
all right. We have confirmation. We are live. So if we could get a roll call, that'd be great. Thank you.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Cassett,
Here.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Rivera,
Here.
Counselor Villarreal,
Present.
Counselor Romero Worth.
I'm here. Okay, do we have changes to the agenda from staff?
Madam Chair, no changes from staff.
Okay, any changes from the committee? Counselor Cassett.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to ask about item K. It is going to Finance Committee first, where it should be going to Finance Committee last for our rules.
HIJK.
It's the Community Development Plan for Midtown. I don't know if there is a time consideration, but for our rules, we should not be hearing it tonight.
Counselor Lindell. Yeah, I thought it was just bills, but of
Isn't it
course,
all legislation?
we have that handy book. Yes.
How do you know? Sure do. It should be here, right? Yeah, so all legislation, unless the legislation, not bill, requires action by governing body by a date, it should go to any relevant standing or special committees, quality of life and public works, and then finance.
But legislation, so. Yeah, question is. We haven't done what before? Yeah. Unless there's an objection, I would let it go. And let's flag it. To make sure that you have an objection? Last. Okay. Well, I don't know. Let's think about what the motion would be. I think we would just take it off the agenda.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I think you would amend the agenda to remove it tonight's agenda and then it would come back.
Because we don't want to postpone it because then it gets stuck here. So let's just take it off the agenda. So we need a motion.
Move to approve as amended.
Well, wait, we need to,
I need to make a motion to remove it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I make a motion to remove item K from the agenda to be heard at the next Finance Committee meeting after it's quality of life and public works.
and it was coming to governing body next week.
So this will delay its arrival at governing body.
And do we have anybody here with Midtown? Is that going to mess things up in some way or fashion? All right, I guess, let me just do one quick thing. So we have a motion. Is there a second? And then for the purposes of discussion, what happens if we delay this going to governing body by another meeting?
Madam Chair, members of the commission. I don't know what the committee schedule looks like beyond what's detailed here. We had intended to get this introduced and, earlier, as you know, and we had packet problems on Prime Gov and it's been delayed. We, as I recall from before Christmas, I've had a long break here, sorry. As I recall, the discussions from the applicant team before Christmas, we had two options on getting, a couple options on when we would take it to governing body. One path was going to have it pass through the bare minimum of committees, and going with governing body on the 11th in our mind was going to allow it to go through all the normal committees plus Community Development Commission, et cetera. So, and I'm not sure I'm understanding, or if I heard the issue correctly, are you saying that
Yeah.
finance is the last stop?
Director Wheeler, would you mind? Yeah, never mind. So no, so here's the issue. The issue is if we pull this from the agenda tonight and finance hears it last, and then that will mean that it won't be heard on the 11th. It will be heard at the second meeting in January. Is there a reason why it needed to pass at our first meeting in January? What does that do to the project or to the contents of the resolution?
It doesn't really create any problems for the plan itself. I think all of us on the team would just like to get it done. We had originally hoped to go to Planning Commission with the community development plan back on November 30th. We had intended to run them together. So I think for us, it's just wrapping up loose ends and trying to get it done. But I don't think it really creates a problem. We just kind of laid out the quickest path we could find, essentially, since it has been delayed several times.
You should have checked.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I think the one time sensitive issue is that we've got these RFPs that have been released, and we really want the plan to be in place and approved and discussed so that we ensure that the evaluation of the RFPs takes the plan into consideration. The timing, the second week in January, the RFPs are still going to be out. So it's not critical, but that was some of the urgency in getting it approved by council at the earlier meeting was because of the RFPs.
Madam Chair, if I can just add, that was a great point, Alexandra. Because originally when we set out on this path to get to governing body on the 11th, we had not extended the RFP. So that would have made things tighter. We have extended the RFP due date by a month, which also therefore pushes off the evaluation by a month. So as Alexandra said, it's less of a factor.
Questions?
I'm happy to hear it tonight if that does have an impact on the project.
So how does the committee feel about this, Councilor Rivera?
The only concern I have is that EDAC, Economic Development Advisory Committee, hears it on the same day that it would be heard at governing body. And if they have any, I know they're only an advisory board, but if they have recommendations or concerns, that makes it a little bit tough. And I think that's a pretty important advisory committee to take a look at it beforehand. So that would be my only concern.
Councilwoman Villarreal.
Madam Chair, I guess I was okay with it being heard in finance, and part of my frustration is we actually completely changed our CDC schedule so that we can hear it on the 4th ahead of time.
In order
Or the
to
11th.
make
And
the
so
11th.
It was an inconvenience for me, but we went ahead and did that for the members so that they could hear it before it was actually being heard on the 11th. So
Yep.
I am of the mindset to continue with this schedule, but I would like to hear from Councilwoman Cassidy about EDAC.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak about to EDAC. Fortunately, EDAC has been kept pretty well informed of the development at Midtown. So I don't think there's going to be too much here that is new for them. But you're right, this is a problem. We actually will be changing the days of the EDAC meetings to the first Wednesday of the month instead of the second for that exact reason. And if there is anything that comes that is really substantive, that will be on me to then spend my afternoon trying to make those adjustments, and I can bring that to the governing body if there's something that really does come up in EDAC that is of concern. So I am happy to take on that responsibility.
If I may, Madam Chair and members of
Yes.
the committee, I've received confirmation from other team members that it does not create issues for us. So if it's the pleasure of the committee to delay, which as has been pointed out by several of you, gives more time for any EDAC input to go into it, then we are fine with that. It's your choice, of course, anyhow, but it's not a problem.
Madam Chair, I guess I was thinking about our agenda for the 11th versus our agenda for, what is it, the 25th? And we have a pretty full agenda on the 11th.
Yes, we do. Okay, I was not made aware of this issue today, so, I guess we have a motion, we have a second. I guess the motion was to take it off of tonight's agenda. We could hear from the city manager. I don't know if that's helpful. But I don't know if you've already checked with Lee, if you've already checked with your folks.
Madam Chair, I just heard from Daniel Hernandez, but
Madam Chair, is the motion to postpone or just move this to the next finance committee?
Well, the motion was to take it off the agenda tonight. I don't think we want to postpone because then it keeps it stuck here. So Councilor Lindell. Yeah, no, it'll come back. Okay. Okay. Yes.
Madam Chair, we have Director Rich Brown on the Zoom, if you would like to have him provide input.
Sure.
Okay.
Since we've got him.
The TV's turned on, please.
Director Brown, we have a question. There's concern, generally resolutions come to finance last. This resolution on Midtown, the community development plan, is coming to finance first. And if we were to take it off the agenda tonight and have it rescheduled to be last, does that hurt, which would mean it would be delayed at governing body, it wouldn't be there on the 11th, it wouldn't be there till the end of January. Does that create problems for the project or for any piece of it?
Madam Chair, thank you for that. Happy New Year to everyone. I would strongly suggest that you keep it on the agenda for tonight. I think there's a calendar of committees that we're trying to connect with, and having it here allows us to sort of get that process going. We do have some RFPs that are in process, but this plan and all the work that's been done on it, just we're trying to make sure that we follow through and get it through on the schedule that we originally wanted. So that would be my suggestion and request. If you could work on it tonight, the team is here. I think Mr. Hernandez is on the waiting room, and Director Lat's there, and so is Mr. Loxton, who can speak to the plan that we have in front of you.
That is true. We do have staff, and there are a number of them who have taken it upon themselves to be here tonight. So that is something we should think about. Counselor Cassett.
I'm fine to hear it tonight. Given that there does seem to be a time factor, and I can simply remove my motion, right?
Yeah, you can do that. Would the second also withdraw? Okay. We've withdrawn the motion and the second, and
Move to approve the agenda.
there we go. Is there a second to approve the
Second.
agenda?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That motion passes. We're on to the consent agenda. I believe there were items the committee is interested in hearing, but let me just first ask, are there changes at all to the consent agenda?
Madam Chair, no changes from staff to the consent agenda.
Okay, great. Counselors, what are you interested in tonight? Counselor Rivera,
Item G and item J.
G and J, okay. Others? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Madam Chair, item G as well, item I, and item, I have questions on J as well. Thank you.
Okay, Counselor Lindell,
Item K and item L.
and Counselor Cassett.
Everything's been pulled. Thank you.
Okay. Is there a motion as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as amended. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? That motion passes. All right, we have two presentations tonight, and then obviously 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things pulled off the agenda. So I do want to keep us moving along. We're going to continue to try to be very, this will help us in budget hearings, I think, cognizant of our time and, just making sure that everybody has a turn and that we move through things, giving everybody enough time, but also recognizing we don't want to be here all night. So with that, two presentations. The first is the audit update, and we have Emily Oster, our finance director, with us. And I will let you take that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. I am happy to report that the audits are moving forward. We currently have 6 team members from Clifton Larson Allen, which is our consulting firm, assisting us with audit prep, and they are moving through many, many items and making lots of progress. We also have the first list of audit items requested by Carr, Riggs and Ingram, which is the city's new auditor. There are about 70 items that we're in the process of gathering. Those are due on Monday. And the requests are very standard, what I would expect to see from a first-year auditor. So they're gathering information about the city to build their file and gain an understanding of the entity. Finance is working closely with our consultants at Clifton Larson Allen, with IT, and with a number of other city departments to gather those items and submit them by Monday. And I wanted to report to you that we are continuing to move forward with the month-end close process. We started the process for closing December of 2022 today, and we expect to close out that month on January 17th. With that, I'll stand for any questions on the audit status.
Questions from the committee? Okay. We will move on then to the second presentation, which is an overview of accounting standards and rules. I thought this was an important presentation to help the committee and the public understand some of the parameters and rules, I guess, and standards that the finance department has to operate under, and these Emily will go into in greater detail and so take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. I appreciate your interest in accounting standards and rules. There are many, as we'll discuss this evening, there are many different standard setting bodies. And so, you know, when you're considering an accountant, one of the things that you really want to make sure you're getting in your accountant is a person who is good at understanding and following complex rules. So with that, let me dive into the presentation here. So in the United States, there's an organization called the Financial Accounting Federation, and this is a nonprofit organization. It's based in Connecticut, and it has two different other organizations that it works with. There's the Financial Accounting Standards Board, which establishes accounting standards for private and public companies and nonprofit organizations. And then there's the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, which establishes standards for state and local governments. And we fall under the GASB standards. So when we're talking about standards, what these really are rules about how we're going to present certain types of transactions in our financial statements. And the overarching goal here is to provide consistency among similar entity types and allow users of the financial reports to make informed decisions based on those financial reports. So if you imagine that you're considering purchasing municipal bonds, and you may be torn between purchasing those of one city versus another city, and you want to know, how well positioned that entity is to repay its bonds, then you might look at the financial statements. And you want to make sure that what you're looking at is an apples to apples comparison. And that is what these standards are all about, to make sure that similar transactions are being presented consistently across similar types of entities. So, as I mentioned, we follow the Governmental Accounting Standards Board standards. In addition, let's see if I can get my slides to work here. We also have federal oversight that we're subject to. The Office of Management and Budget puts out a rule called the Uniform Guidance. The full name is here on the slide. I won't bore you by reading it, but it's part of the Code of Federal Regulations. And the Uniform Guidance is an authoritative set of rules and requirements for federal grant awards. So of course, as you're aware, the city receives a number of different federal awards, both directly from federal agencies and then also pass through the state and through other entities. We also have a little bit of overlap with the Securities and Exchange Commission. That is because we do sell bonds. We issue debt, which is publicly traded. So the Securities and Exchange Commission has the Office of Municipal Securities, which coordinates the SEC's activities and administers rules pertaining to those municipal securities. In the local context, the New Mexico statutes, the Audit Act governs the audit requirements for governmental entities here in New Mexico. And the Audit Act requires that the financial affairs of every agency with annual revenue of $500,000 or more be thoroughly audited and examined each year. Those audits can be done by the state auditor's office, by personnel of the state auditor's office, or by independent auditors approved by the state auditor. In New Mexico, most audits are performed by independent auditors. However, the contracts have to be approved by the state auditor's office, and the vendor, the contractor, has to be on the state auditor's approved list of auditors. The auditor has requirements, which we'll talk about on the next slide, and the audits are required to be conducted in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and rules issued by the state auditor. There's another piece of this called the administrative rules, the New Mexico Administrative Code, and the state auditor has rulemaking authority, and they've used that to enact the audit rule, which is, again, like I said, in the Administrative Code. And so this is much more detailed. The statute lays out a framework for how governmental audits are conducted in New Mexico. And the administrative code, the audit rule, talks about the specific policies and procedures, rules and requirements for how those audits are conducted. And some of those requirements apply to the auditor and others apply to the auditee. And in order for an audit to be accepted by the state auditor's office, it has to be reviewed by the office of the state auditor and determined to be in compliance, both that the audit was conducted by the auditor in compliance with the rules and that the entity being audited is in compliance with those rules. And that rule is updated annually by the office of the state auditor. There are always changes. All of these standards are revisited. They're updated as conditions change. And so, of course, all these rules change as those things happen. There are also standards for auditors that are relevant to the auditee as well. Because we're a governmental entity, we're required to have an audit in accordance with generally accepted government auditing standards, which is fondly referred to as GAGAS. Try to get a little laugh in this presentation. I know the material is somewhat dry, but the yellow book is maybe another way of referring to GAGAS. So what that lays out is the rules for conducting an audit that's subject to federal oversight. So that outlines the requirements for the report itself, the qualifications for auditors, quality control for the audit organization. I want to specifically talk about the professional qualifications for the auditors. As a CPA, under the state regulations, I'm required to complete 40 hours of continuing professional education. And then as a person who works in government, I have to complete 24 hours every 2 years of government-specific continuing education. And that rule comes from the Yellow Book. So that's an example of how those rules are applied. We also have the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and the Auditing Standards Board, and they issue statements on auditing standards, which lay out the rules for how audits are conducted and what kind of evidence the auditor has to collect in order to support their opinion. Now, on the audit side, all of these things are reviewed by third parties. The audit firms are subject to a peer review requirement. The Office of the State Auditor is peer reviewed by other offices of the state auditor. So there's a lot of checks and balances built into this process to make sure that every step along the way, from the original accounting for a transaction all the way up to the audit documentation retained by the auditor, is done in accordance with standards and that the documentation meets the requirements of those standards. I just want to circle back. I'm sorry, I forgot to advance my slides. Oh, there we go. We're at questions. I just want to circle back and reiterate that, there are a number of different standard setting bodies that are involved in promulgating accounting rules and accounting standards. Some of them are at the national level, and then at the local level, we have the Audit Act and the Audit Rule. And one of my jobs as your finance director is making sure that the city is understanding and correctly applying those rules. Then we have an external audit that comes in and reviews that and validates that. They flag any issues that they find through findings, and then we use those as we continue our process of improvement. The main takeaway that I'd like to leave you with here is that we're not making this up as we go. There are many external parties involved in setting these standards and then ensuring that they're being applied appropriately, and with the overarching goal of making sure that our financial reports are comparable to other governmental entities, other cities and counties and other entities that are reporting under GASB standards. That's all I have. Do you have any questions for me on this material?
Questions from the committee? I just a comment. So that's a lot of training, 40 hours and then an additional 24 because of your work with a governmental entity. And I thought 12 continuing legal education hours was a lot. So I'll stop complaining about that. All right. Seems like we're good. So thank you for that. I just thought it was a good thing for us to be aware of. And obviously, we don't need to have the depth of understanding that our finance director does, but I think it is good to be aware of the things that you're complying with, the things that direct your work on the audits and our financial position. So appreciate that. All right, with that, we have a long agenda. We are going to item G, which is on consent, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And we are going to, this is request for approval of general services contract with the Kiwanis Club, of Santa Fe to plan, coordinate, execute celebrations for New Year's Eve and Dia de los Muertos for 4 years in the total amount of $300,000, including NMGRT. And we have 2 distinguished gentlemen here with us to answer questions. And I don't know, did you want them to talk about this at all, or just you have particular questions? And Councilor Rivera, I believe you pulled this first, and then Councilwoman Villarreal, you had some questions as well.
Is that a question, Madam Chair?
Okay.
Mr. Randall, how did this come to be where we put both the New Year's Eve celebration and Dia de los Muertos on the same RFP?
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, members of the committee, it was basically to make it a simpler process. I think the RFP did allow any applicant to respond to one or the other, or both. And we only had 2 responses to both.
Why Dia de los Muertos and not Pride, or not Juneteenth, or not any of the other events that we have on the plaza?
Madam Chair, Counselor, that was a decision. Tourism Department felt that New Year's Eve is a celebration that the city should have. And Dia de Muertos was added because it had been suggested as a new event type celebration for the city that not only would appeal to the residents, but also to visitors. And it would be a relatively unique celebration for Santa Fe to have as an American-based city. But with the number of Mexican heritage members of our community, we thought it would be something of interest to the residents as well. But I think it's because of there's really 2 factors. One is the visitation that it could attract. Second one is the time of year. It's the end of October, which is traditionally a slower weekend for Santa Fe that we don't fill, and we could use a new event to fill that in, much as Wine and Chili did many years ago for the last weekend of September. And finally, I think the thing that makes it unique from a Wine and Chili, it really doesn't have a way to support itself. It doesn't have a fundraising component to it because it's free. It's offered for free to both visitors and residents.
Who is it suggested by?
It was originally suggested to me by Ray Sandoval, who does our New Year's Eve.
So how successful was the first one, which we just recently did?
Madam Chair, Counselor, if I can, let me have Ray respond to that because I was on personal leave and didn't attend the event. From an attendance standpoint, there were 5.4, according to the software that measures the activity on the plaza, the 2 days, there were 5,400 people between the 2 days that attended the events.
And you're saying that this brought in people from outside city limits, outside the state, brought tourism in?
Madam Chair, Counselor, I'm not sure that this first event did because we didn't promote it because it was a first event. We think that it is an event that we can promote and can bring in significant visitation.
So Kiwanis has led the New Year's Eve celebration for many years, and that was at the request of the city. And thank you for doing that. They've been doing a great job. So that even brings more curiosity as to why we included Dia de los Muertos, which Mr. Sandoval is clearly running as well into that same process. Clearly, they have the most experience with that, which was looked at by the evaluation committee. I'm not sure how Sagebird would have even been able to compete had they submitted all the proper documentation. Just curious as to how all that again has come about, and it just seems on the surface to me as inappropriate, I guess.
Sure. So Madam Chairman, Counselor, so there's nothing inappropriate about this. This is something that your constituents want. I have tried for years to get our Mexican American community from the South Side to feel welcome at the plaza with Zozobra. It has just been too far of a stretch. They just don't understand it. In fact, one time when we actually had some folks who had just moved to the South Side, when they came to see Zozobra, they thought it was a demon. They made the sign of the cross. And so we decided that in order for us to make that community feel welcome in our plaza, that we needed to create an event to bring them something that their culture already understood and to bring it forth and to do this. And so I raised the money, PNM put in a significant amount. Zozobra put in $16,000, the amount that we went short in order to do this. And Councilor, I'll remind you that Kiwanis runs 4th of July for free on our liability, even though it's a city event. Same thing with New Year's Eve. We do charge a production fee because that's how I get my volunteers to come and stay till 2:30 in the morning, which we just did in the cold to clean up. That is also on our liability, and so is Dia de Muertos. And so by keeping those costs low, we hope that we would be able to do this. And so I hope there isn't a suggestion that that's inappropriate for a community event organizer to arrange an event that is determined to get citizens from our South Side to make them feel welcome on the heart of our city, which is our plaza.
Well, part of what you said made it sound like because you do those other things for free, that we should support Dia de los Muertos.
No, the thing is that even though the city has a tort liability for those instances, that again helps the city by us actually by the Kiwanis International policy covering these type of events. So that allows us to bring in. And the other thing too is that when we charge a production fee, we do it for $5,000 for New Year's Eve. We don't charge one on 4th of July. There's just no money to be made there. In order to do that. We do this because we believe that we're good citizens, but when someone says that what we're proposing is inappropriate, I feel like we have to defend ourselves.
Well, I'm just telling you the way it came off and what you said. So, so my constituents on the South Side are wondering why Dia de los Muertos isn't held on the South Side, where most of these residents live, my constituents live.
Again, that was because of the fact that the feedback was that people didn't feel from the South Side didn't feel welcome on the plaza itself. And so again, this is years and years of going out. We actually went to Paisanos. We got them to do a Zozobra Piñata to try to get folks to feel like they were welcome. And the feedback was, we don't feel welcome on the plaza. And Counselor, I wish you would have been there that Friday night when the Capitol High Mariachi band performed and all their families were there. It was amazing to see folks. And I had a young man, 16 years old, who was in full mariachi dress and said to me, in this environment where we feel like we're being picked on by the last administration, the Dreamers, everything that happened, to feel like we were welcome to perform on our plaza, he said that was the greatest moment of his life so far.
All right. Many of the constituents I've heard from would like to see it on the South Side, on their side of town where they feel like that's where they all live. A majority of them live. So, yeah, just,
That's what we can absolutely look at that. And if this is a city event, and if that's what the constituents want, again, it was an idea that we wanted to make sure that folks didn't feel, I feel as a citizen, I don't like the south side versus the north side. And I really want everybody to feel like this. And the plaza is historically the heart of our community. And I want every group to feel welcome.
And Counselor, I'd add that for lodgers tax to support it, we need to have it where it's not only resident friendly, but visitor friendly. And if it will work as well on the south side, that's fine. I think it would be harder to find. And I don't know that it would have the same appeal as it does by putting it on the plaza.
So it wasn't a city event, but I guess this is gonna make it one, right? Now that we're putting up most of the bill for it.
Madam Chair, Counselor, the total that's going to the two events is $75,000. The total combined cost of the two events is about $180,000. So the city is not funding the entire events as we do for the 4th of July. It's a mixture of the two. Now, I think
Wait a minute, so we do fund the entire 4th of July event?
well, Counselor, I misspoke because it doesn't come from tourism, so I can't confirm that. I understand that we do, but I can't confirm that. But the cost of the Dia de los Muertos next year will probably come down because of the experimental nature of this year. We tried some things that we may not be able to afford to continue. So I think the total cost of the two events, our $75,000 will be about 50% of the total funding required.
Right, and I still didn't get an answer really on why not Pride, why not Juneteenth, why not other events?
From my team's perspective, this has much more of an opportunity to bring visitation to the city, whereas Pride and Juneteenth are celebrated in a lot of cities, and we haven't seen that people travel and stay in our hotels for those celebrations. May be incorrect, but that's the evaluation from our team in tourism.
All that for now, Madam Chair.
Councilwoman Villarreal, you also pulled this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. And Randy, I already got some additional information. Because this is finance, I wanted to understand the budgets of these events and what are the line items that consist of each of them. And so that was helpful for you to provide that information. There was one question I did have. One of the line items said it went to you.
Yeah,
Your name was on there as a. So I don't know. You may want to explain that, because if it goes to Kiwanis, it should say Kiwanis. And it shouldn't say Mr. Sandoval.
Madam Chair, Councilor, that's correct. It was improperly stated. It does go to Kiwanis as a production fee, and then there's a $5,000 that goes to Kiwanis Foundation.
Okay. Just want to make that clear that it doesn't go to Ray Sandoval's pocket. So, no, that's what I was thinking.
Nor mine.
So New Year's Eve is a tried and true event. We've had a track record. We know it works. I'm sure we've made tweaks along the way. And Dia de los Muertos was the first run this year. I did attend the first day, and it wasn't super populated. I think there were more people that came the second day. And as I've said before, I want the plaza to still be for the people. So whether you all decide it's on the plaza or down south, I think it will depend on the community and what they want. And I guess what's hard for me is like, there's kind of a contradiction here. Like, we want this to be a community event, but you also want it to be a tourism event. To me, you can't put a tourism price tag for a cultural spiritual event like Dia de los Muertos. It's been commercialized now, but it still has significance for people's spiritual practices. So, I don't see that. I see that it's incongruent with tourism, and there's a big Dia de los Muertos event in Denver. There's other cities that actually do Dia de los Muertos. So we will be competing with other people to come during this time. But I guess I want it to be a successful local event. And what I wanted to understand, since it's new, is how it what you learned from the 2-day event. And we didn't get any report specifically about, I got some notes later on that Randy's forwarded on to me, but I really wanted to understand like what worked, what did you all think worked? And then what do you think is going to change this following year or years? Mostly because we want to, I'm sure there's lessons learned. So if there's anything you want to share, and I will share with you what I got in terms of feedback from folks.
Great, thank you. Yes, Madam Chair, Counselor, we learned quite a bit. One is that we understood we had to seed this event, right? Which is why we wanted to do it this first year without asking for this kind of help. Obviously, Tourism Santa Fe and Randy helped us quite a bit with about $14,000 of that large budget, but we wanted to be able to do that on our own. What we learned was that we needed to actually teach some of our other locals who hadn't had an experience with this, what the ofrendas were. And they weren't as decorated or populated as we would have liked to do that. We had a lot of sponsorship from our hotels, which was excellent, that paid for the building of them. We had lots of items that folks could use, but we landed up really decorating them ourselves. The Kiwanis Club decorated them, and La Fonda helped us as well. But we learned that we needed to create more awareness of what the ofrendas are, and really hope to get people to be able to do that. The one thing that was really successful was that we actually found little Polaroid cameras. I can't even believe that they still exist. And we had little tiny frames. And so what people were doing is they were bringing us, they were taking photos of their loved ones off of their cell phones and taking a photo and then putting them in the little frame and putting them on the ofrenda. So that was a really successful. Showing the movie to see people on blankets watching Coco with their kids on the plaza was just phenomenal. And we would like the candlelight procession. We gave out 2,000 candles, almost 3,000 glow necklaces. And the procession that we did around, we want that to grow. We want it to be able to go outside of the plaza and actually to maybe have multiple mobile ofrendas as well, that we can actually do that. So that's something that we could grow. We did have great cooperation from the Embassy of Mexico. We had great from Paraguas. We had Aztec dancers, but we still need to make additional outreach to some of our folks here. So we want to be able to start on that. We're going to start in March, so that way we can include more people. The library helped us quite a bit. The Folk Art Museum was great. But again, we can always use more input to make sure that we include everybody and that we're doing stuff appropriately.
Thank you. I guess what I'm hoping for and would be a requirement, since we keep touting that Dia de los Muertos is for our Latino Mexicano population in Santa Fe, is that the things that I noticed the one day I was there, and I also got feedback the second day, is there was no advertisement on the event in Spanish. Big glaring problem. If you want to get the Mexican population, Spanish speaking population, we need to advertise to them. I mean, that's just like a no-brainer. Then they didn't have anyone that was emceeing in Spanish. How do you expect the Mexican or Spanish speaking population to know what's going on when you only have an English speaking announcer or MC? So I'm just letting you know that was some criticism I got from constituents, saying that they didn't feel welcome as people that spoke Spanish. And the other thing is that since I was trying to change aspects of having more local events down at the plaza with the ordinance change, and I got feedback, not just from vendors, but some of my colleagues, well, we don't know what you're going to be selling down there, and it shouldn't come from China, and all these criticisms like that. Well, I looked on your spreadsheet and most of the things you bought were from Amazon. So I would suggest, since we want to support local, is that we get items that were in the booth that you're allowed to sell, that you actually get local people to sell some of their items. Because if you get them from Amazon, you're getting them probably from China. So I would like us to support local as much as possible. And I think the way we did do that is you all collaborated with the group that brought in the musicians and different entertainers. And I think that was great. All of those had a lot of local clout and some great following. So I would suggest continuing doing that. So there's things that I think went well that I saw and what people told me. I just want us to continue to support the local. If we're saying that this is for the local population to bring more Latino community members to the plaza, then we need to do it and actually focus on it. And the money, even though it's for tourism, you say it should also be to get local people down there. And I actually think we should be supporting through tourism dollars Juneteenth and Pride, because we don't even know what that could entail, what that could bring to Santa Fe, what community members would come to Santa Fe, because we have these celebrations that continue to grow. So I just think part of me wants us to just support the New Year's Eve event for 4 years and then just wait another year and see how you all improve upon the first Dia de los Muertos, the inaugural, and see how this year that we're in works out for you, instead of deciding that this is going to be a tourism event for 4 years. So I would make that change.
So Madam Chair, Counselor, so we run Zozobra and that is my baby, right? I have to fundraise for Zozobra. If I don't get the help from the city, I don't know that I can continue Dia de los Muertos. That was $16,000 that not only did I take money from sponsorships from Zozobra, I had to take Zozobra funds of $16,000 to get this event off. So that was one thing. One time from PNM. PNM seeded this at $55,000 as a one time to try to get it off the ground. So I would just, I want to be completely honest, but those are the realities, is that, and I have Zozobra's 100th coming up. My entire focus will be on Zozobra's.
Which brings me to another point. You have a lot on your plate. Kiwanis team has a lot on your plate. And then you have another event that you're adding to your portfolio.
Because
And
we think it's important for our community. We saw a need. Our goal is to better this community one child at a time. And when we see folks who are in high schools who think that their heritage is something to be ashamed of, that we don't want them on our plaza, that's our mission. And so if I don't get any sleep, that's okay, because that's what I'm doing. And so I think that that's why this event was critical. I tried so hard with Zozobra to make folks feel welcome. And I think it was just a bridge too far. Zozobra is this wacky thing that we do here in Santa Fe. And so this is really why we wanted to be able to do that. And we will take your suggestions, the MC, absolutely. But there were Spanish commercials ran on Quesuave. So Esteban helped me record those, and we had to find a Spanish speaker to record those. And most of the purchases from Amazon were for the candles and those other stuff. We actually got things we barely got here because they got held up in customs, because we actually went to Mexico to get authentic. And so all the stuff that was sold in our merchandise was authentic, all the shakers, all the skulls, all of those things. And even Joe Sheps drove a truck down to Mexico to make sure that we would get those. So again, we can look for local artisans who can do those, but we did want to make sure that it was authentic. But those things that, like the battery held candles, we didn't think it was appropriate for 2,000 people to have lit candles on the plaza. So we thought it was much easier to do those for men's.
thank you. I think, yeah, I mean, I think that this is a great opportunity, and I want to see it succeed. I guess I'm just really conflicted by tourism for tourism's sake, and actually a community event that's for community members. And that's the contradiction for me.
Madam Chair, Counselor, there's no intent to attempt to commercialize this in a way that would be more attractive to visitation. I just think it's a unique opportunity for a lot of our markets. It may not be Denver if they have one up there. I lived there for 12, 15 years and I never heard about it. So I'm not sure how successful it is, but West Texas, there are a lot of markets that we deal with who I think would love to come and see this authentic program event. There's no intent because of visitation to try to make it any different than as if visitors were not allowed into it.
Well, I think the reason why you haven't seen tourism being promoted is because Dia de los Muertos is a local event, and it's for local people that celebrate it and has a spiritual connection. So that's where I see this challenge for me. I'd like us to support New Year's Eve because like I said, it's tried and true. I just want to give Dia de los Muertos. I want tourism to support you all. I just think that putting a contract for 4 years is not the right approach right now. And I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Counselor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Sandoval, you do 4 events for the city, is that right?
Madam Chairman, Counselor, yes, that is correct.
And seems like I read in the newspaper recently that you got named one of those 10 that make a difference. Is that right? Was that you?
That's true, Counselor. Thank
All
you.
right. I think that what you and the Kiwanis do is astounding. And we could make all of these city events. Every event that we do in this city, every event that gets city money, and there's a bunch of them. But I wouldn't even want to ask Mr. Randall how many employees, how many full-time FTEs we would need to pull all of these events off. It would cost us hundreds and hundreds of thousands to do that. And I think that we all know that we're limited in how we spend our lodgers tax money. What's the qualification, Mr. Randall, on spending lodgers tax money?
Madam Chair, Counselor, it needs to be spent for marketing and advertising of tourism or anything that is involved in the development of tourism to the city.
And that's dictated to us by the state. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Counselor, that is correct.
So we're pretty careful now about not spreading that money around just hither and yon. From what I've seen in the past, I've been around for a while, and it seems like we're kind of careful about how we spend our lodgers tax money.
Madam Chair, Counselor, absolutely. We try to ensure that it's spent the way it was intended as it's collected.
Mr. Sandoval, we came up short on this project, and we had a pretty sizable donation from P&M, and we ended up robbing Zozobra to pay for this event, right?
Madam Chairman, Counselor, yes, that's correct.
So if we want to keep these events that speak to many in this city, and also speak to many that don't live in this city, that want to participate and want to be a part of those events. Those cultural events speak to them also. Can we depend on P&M and Zozobra to carry through our events? No. You're shaking your head, but you got to say it.
No, sorry, Counselor. Yeah, P&M
All right.
made it clear that it was a one-time, try to get this off the ground. And my board was not happy that $16,000 from Zozobra went to cover the deficit. But we made a commitment because we believe that it was important to show our youth on the south side that they had a place on our plaza.
Well, I hope that you go back and tell all of our friends at the Kiwanis that we appreciate them. We see the amount of volunteerism that comes from that club, the deep love of this city that they show year in and year out by doing 4 events. I mean, you barely get done with one, but what you start the next one. And I don't think that this is a big ask. And I think it's a very, very good expenditure of these funds, because we don't know. We have no way of knowing exactly how deeply these events speak to some of our fellows and our constituents, our friends, and our friends from far. So this is not a big expenditure. I'm grateful to you, Raymond, and I hope that you'll express gratitude to the members of the Kiwanis, because I know they work like crazy all year round. So thank you, Chair.
Counselor Cassidy.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Sorry. And thank you both for being here. I think this has been a really interesting conversation, and there's a couple pieces that I'm taking away from this. I appreciate Councilor Lindell, the discussion around lodgers tax, and quite frankly, I enjoy the opportunity to be creating a community event utilizing lodgers tax. That it seems like there's a dual function that we can provide here. But I do think that the comments from Councilwoman Villarreal and Councilor Rivera do speak to the fine line that needs to be walked with this event. And so there's both this benefit of providing another segment of our community an opportunity to see their culture reflected on the plaza. And there's also this incredible benefit that I know is something that I have always cherished growing up in Santa Fe, of opportunities to really learn and experience other cultures and other traditions. But that how that is done is really crucial, so that it is done in a way with the communities leading the way. Ray, if you could speak a little bit both to the partners that you worked with for this past year, but also, are there additional partners that you did not have the opportunity to work with this past year that you will be reaching out to for future events to really make sure that balance is kept?
Yes, Madam Chairman and Councilor, thank you for that. Yes, we didn't have an opportunity to reach out to some other of our local Mexican American residents here. I think that we need to do that. We had a great participation by Paraguas. We had great participation by the Folk Art Museum. We had great participation by the Mexican Embassy as well. We had authentic Aztec dancers. We had other dancers that were there. And I think that that's the entire opportunity, is now to be able to show that we could get this off the ground and that it was successful, and that people really were excited about it. I think it actually helps us get more input, because, when you say, hey, we're going to do something, people don't know exactly what is going to be, what you're going to accomplish. And so now we can go to them with a record. And if you just give me just a second, I think that, and Councilor Villarreal, I hear your point about getting off the ground, but I hope at this point that Kiwanis has proved that it can run events successfully. We took over July 4th with 2 weeks to go when Mayor Gonzalez called us and said, Boys and Girls Club is out. Can you do this? And we were able to put a successful event together. So I think our track record of running these events is something that speaks for itself, even though we just have one event behind us. But again, Councilor, back to your point, I think that having now the ability to point to what we did allows people to feel like they can have input to say, hey, I liked this, or you excluded this, or you didn't do this. Obviously the MC, it was a huge oversight. So I'm glad that you brought that up. You're absolutely right. If we want to be able to have that culture, we need to have a bilingual MC that can go back and forth in Spanish and English. So we will learn from this, but I think that that's why it was so important for Kiwanis to get this off the ground, because instead of having a concept, now you have an event that you had, and now we can pick and choose and kind of tweak.
Thank you. I understand Councilwoman Villarreal's kind of hesitancy to do all 4 years. one thing I would say though is that I think that it probably will take a few years to really massage this out, and I would imagine that the consistency of knowing that that funding is coming through. However, if I am not mistaken, we can always not appropriate these dollars. Am I correct that there probably is something in the contract that says, subject to appropriation by the governing body? Am I correct? I imagine I will find it if I.
Madam Chair, Council, I believe that is correct. We use the standard contract for that the
Right.
city has, which does require appropriation for it to be available.
And then the city may terminate this agreement for convenience or cause. What would convenience mean?
Madam Chair, so we're looking at the appropriation clause.
I'm looking at page 19 of the packet, 3 of 14 of the contract under termination.
Okay, and I'm on, Madam Chair and Councilor Cassidy, I'm on item 17, the appropriation clause.
Yes, I
that
apologize. I
says
jumped
it's,
back and
contingent on sufficient appropriation and authorization being made by
Okay.
the city council for the performance of the agreement.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly, if for some reason we see this really going south, we have tools in our tool belt to pull this contract. Am I correct? Or to essentially,
Madam
Terminate
Chair, yes, just because the contract is approved in its current form, the governing body could always choose to terminate it.
okay. So given that, I do feel comfortable with approving a 4-year contract with the understanding that there are some continued developments that need to be made with this event. I unfortunately was not able to attend myself this year. But I do look forward to hopefully attending next year. And I think the continued engagement with the community is something that will be important for us to watch and to get more information on and to hear about as we continue to move forward with this. So I do appreciate the work of the Kiwanis and all the events that are put on in our city. I think that it really is important to have these various community events. And there are some different avenues by which we might be supporting them. I think that the larger question that Councilor Rivera brought up of how do we choose which events are sponsored by the city and which are not. Randy, to your point, this one is one that tourism would like to see, whereas 4th of July does not come from the tourism budget. It comes from a different funding source within the city. So I think that that's probably part of a larger conversation that maybe we need to be thinking about as a governing body as we're looking at different events and as we want them promoted, what are some of our funding sources that we have as opportunities? And sometimes tourism might be one, and this one looks like it might be one that we can utilize tourism dollars, which again, I am in favor of using lodgers tax dollars for things that have a dual benefit.
Madam Chair, Councilor, I'd also like to remind the committee that you do have appropriated this last year and this last year brought it up to $100,000 from $75,000 that is available through Occupancy Tax Advisory Board for any event to apply for funds for. Because tourism felt that this was one that we wanted to support and be able to continue. It seemed better to not use part of that $100,000 to come up with these extra dollars that leaves that $100,000 available for any other event that impacts tourism to apply for.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate that additional information. I have no other questions. Ray, I do appreciate your willingness to take this on because as has been expressed today, it really is a big responsibility to be taking on an event of this nature and to really represent it well and to both provide that opportunity for the Mexican community within our city, as well as those of us who were not raised with these traditions to really learn about them in a authentic and real way. And as Councilwoman Villarreal mentioned, really being careful of the commercialization and how can we utilize this as an opportunity to bring more mutual understanding and respect and appreciation for a large segment of our community that is frequently invisible. So best of luck to you in taking this on because it truly is a big opportunity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I just want to thank the committee for this conversation. I think it's a good one. There's lots of policy questions that are being asked in various ways. And so because we have a lot more to move on to tonight, I won't belabor anything but to say that when we've been doing the New Year's celebration for how many years now on the plaza?
This was our 9th year.
Yeah, and the first year was
14.
There's 14 below.
okay, so well, I mean, maybe blame it on the cold, but I mean, it has evolved over time. You have learned, I mean, it was cited here tonight as, something that's highly successful and, but it didn't start out that way, right?
No, Madam Chair, we actually had an inflatable Zia that because of the cold kept uninflating. And so I had to run down to Lowe's to get a leaf blower and get a hose and actually keep it inflated. And it was very, very small. And but now we have a beautiful tin Zia that was made by one of our Spanish artisans, and we have fireworks off of the roof of La Fonda, and it's one of my favorite events.
After year 2, it was recognized in USA Today as one of the 10 best small city celebrations of New Year's.
Yeah, and I think you got some coverage in the Albuquerque Journal this year as well, correct?
Madam Chair, we were on the front page.
That's right. So just just as a point of, these things, these events that are successful in our community, evolve over time, get better over time. We learn from our mistakes. We learn how to do them better, and we get more buy-in and more participation, and then they become really worthy of going to. And there is that fine line about, you don't want to commercialize it. You want to keep it authentic. So I think this has been a very interesting conversation, and I just wanted to point out the evolution of how these things happen. But thank you for being here. Thank you for all your work. And if we have a motion from the committee.
Move to approve.
I'll second.
Motion and a second, and I believe we have to take a roll call, correct?
Yes, Madam Chair, whenever there's an action item, we need a roll call vote.
Thank you.
Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
Explain my vote.
Counselor Rivera,
No, and I'd like to explain my vote.
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, we have 3-2. That motion passes. Councilwoman Villarreal to explain your vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to thank Kiwanis. We know you all have a track record. This vote is not based on the fact that we don't think you could do it. I just think that when tourism is involved, the 4 years with New Year's Eve makes sense to me. When it's talking about a cultural event like this, I think they should support it, but I want to make sure that you all kind of tweak this out and make sure that all the things that I brought up and other community members bring up, that you take that into consideration, maybe even making it just 1 day instead of 2, to really consolidate it and make it an event so that people are there, not separated from 1 day to the next. I think that we need to figure that out, like how tourism is going to support certain community or cultural events. And I still don't feel like we have a clear indication of what that looks like, other than what you expressed today. So good luck. And we'll see how this goes when it moves on to the next commission or committee. I think it's council. Thank you.
Councilor Rivera to explain your vote.
Madam Chair, I'll be brief. I support Kiwanis, everything you've done. I'm grateful for all the events that you do. I support Dia de los Muertos. I do not like this process, the process in which we went about it. So that's all I have to say about that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. All right, we are moving on to item I. This is a request for approval of the Recovery Fund's subrecipient project participation agreement in the total amount of $2 million of American Rescue Plan Act, known as ARPA, funds to underwrite the acquisition of the Lamplighter Inn. This agreement falls under the first statutory category to respond to the COVID-19 public health emergency or its negative economic impacts. Bella Luce Apartments 2022 LLP. And we have Alex Ladd with us tonight. And I believe Councilwoman Villarreal, you pulled this item, yeah?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Alex, for being with us. Just wanted to see if you could just explain how this funding allocation is different from the funds that came from CDBG that went towards rehabilitation and the conversion of the Lamplighter Inn. So maybe you could just say that this is a different infusion of funding, and how is it different from the CDBG?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, the CDBG funds are from our regular entitlement grant. So one of the big uses for CDBG funds across the country, we haven't done it as much in Santa Fe, but I think we're certainly prioritizing the preservation and renovation of existing housing, specifically to create affordability restrictions and serve the people who have a hard time either affording homes in the market, workforce renters, or who have rental assistance subsidy, and they can't find a place to use it. So the CDBG funds that this project applied for was part of our regular CDBG funding cycle, and met all of the criteria of the regular CDBG entitlement grant. The ARPA funds are specifically focused on responding to housing conditions created by the global pandemic. In this case, it's to respond to housing insecurity and how that insecurity leads to people getting infected and not having places to quarantine or to be safe, as well as all of the economic ripple effects from the pandemic. So folks who lost jobs and lost incomes and lost housing.
And this particular funding, it's not for rehabilitation. This is for purchasing?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, that is correct. This is to offset the acquisition costs. So the property has already been purchased using funding from the Ancorum Foundation. So much like the Santa Fe Suites project, which received funds through the CARES Act, which was the first recovery act that Congress passed. And there was an interim, this is pretty typical, where there will be something called a bridge loan that's put in place while the permanent financing set up. In this case, we're trying to avoid any financing because the revenues from this project will be so restricted because of the low cost of the rents. Also, that a percentage of the units will be set aside for special needs renters, so very, very low income renters who are likely to be fully supported with, have either no income or very little incomes and be fully supported with rental assistance. So combining the city's ARPA funds with the county's ARPA funds, we're able to pay back the bridge loan, and the property can then be acquired without any debt.
Great. And actually the purchase was more than this amount request.
That is correct. So this requires the 2 million from the city, and I don't want to misspeak. I think it's $1.5 million from the county, because it was just about 3. I think the purchase price was 3.2 plus all of the closing costs.
Okay, I was actually thinking it was more than that, and Ancorum covered that, but you're saying the 3.2 is being offset by our ARPA and then county ARPA as well?
That's correct.
Okay. And so what role will Ancorum play now that they are being reimbursed for the bridge loan or the bridge funding? Will they still have a role to play?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, we're hoping that Ancorum is going to be willing to help with some of the operations. So some of the costs that are related to keeping vulnerable renters housed, creating services to support them while they're housed. This is a new area for Ancorum. I think most of you are familiar, their charter is to support healthcare services, but there's a lot of increasing awareness finally that housing is actually a healthcare issue as well. And so they're hoping that once they get their capital freed up from this project, they would then provide a similar function for another project.
And well, with that purchase from Ancorum, I guess maybe you could just clarify, because I've had questions from constituents about how the ownership of this property, and people continue to think it's a city-owned property. So can you just clarify that piece for us?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, yes, people also still think the city owns Santa Fe Suites, which it's hard to shake this idea. But these are both privately owned properties. So the owner, the Bella Luz LLC, is an affiliate of the JL Gray Company, which is one of the bigger property management companies in New Mexico. It's a New Mexico-based company. They're based in Las Cruces. They've bought properties all over the state. They also function as property managers for tax credit properties that are owned by other entities, but it's a privately held company. And then they'll have a partnership with the LifeLink to provide the on-site services for the residents who need them.
Okay. Thank you. And then, but this contract is actually between us and Bella Luz. And then it also kind of folds in the local lead agency, which is, I believe, LifeLink. So in the contract, it talks about the supportive services plan. And so I'm assuming that's focused on what LifeLink is going to be doing. Does that also define what the city's role is as well?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, that is the agreement between LifeLink and Bella Luz is the social services plan. The city's role could be not from housing funds, but from other funds to help finance that social services plan. But at this point, we don't have a commitment to that other than just making sure that it's in effect and that it's being followed at the property.
Okay. And that was completed already? Because I think in the contract is the January 1st.
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, it is completed. I have to confess, I haven't seen a draft of the social services plan. That's not really my area of expertise. So I believe Cody, who works with me, I think Cody was having the human services folks review it just to make sure it wasn't sort of out of line in any way. And everyone's, it's not 100% specific because we don't really know who's going to be living there and what their needs are going to be, but it's general enough to cover what the best practices indicate are going to be the needs there.
Got it. Okay. So we don't see that. Will the governing body see the supportive services plan? Is that like an internal operating document between the owner and the local lead agency?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, that is correct. It's an internal document. I was just wondering if because it's listed as a performance measure, to have the plan in place, we would have our staff and our human services staff would be reviewing it annually as part of the annual report. Like I said, just to make sure that it's being followed at the property, that all of the folks who need to benefit from it are benefiting from it.
Right. Part of me is like interested in it, like, oh, what does it actually say? But then also I don't think we should be getting involved with kind of operational minutia. That's important. It's important, but I don't know if it's at this level. So I guess I'll just let community members want to make sure that we are up and on it and making sure that it's being followed. So hearing that you'll have an annual review sounds great. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Other questions from the committee? Is there a motion?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve this item. Can we have a roll call, please?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Rivera, Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. All right, we are on to item J. We have this and two other items tonight. Request for approval of a mid-year budget adjustment resolution utilizing FY 22 gross receipts and lodgers tax revenue above budgeted estimates to fund a package of priorities that include the Southside Teen Center, Police Department Administration, Tourism, Santa Fe, Public Safety Radio System, and Regional Emergency Communications Center Recording System totaling $983,873. We have Emily Oster here as well as a variety of staff to answer questions. I believe Councilor Rivera, Councilwoman Villarreal, and maybe a couple others had questions. So Councilor Rivera, if you want to start.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is for the police department. DC Valdez, thanks.
Yes, sir.
My question was, so you want to convert 3 patrol safety aid positions to 2 crime scene technicians, which I'm okay with, but the patrol safety aid, wasn't that the program that was started by the former chief to try to help recruit younger Santa Feans into the police department?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, yes, that was the intent of that program. From the inception of it until we made the recommendation to reclassify some positions to crime scene technicians, we've only had 2 candidates that were incumbents that served in those positions. And we did a lot of effort to try to fill those positions, but they were often competing with our full-time public safety aides. So what we did do is we requested that half of them be converted to public safety aides, which are career personnel. And then the other 3 would be recommended to be reclassified for crime scene technician, which we've seen a great deal of interest in. And currently with our department, we have 2 civilian crime scene technicians, 1 sworn officer serving as a crime scene tech. And that pales in comparison to where we were when I started with the department back in 2005, where we had 4 civilian crime scene techs. We're trying to staff up those numbers to help out with our field capacity, to allow our sworn officers to be available for higher priority calls.
Did the program was it ever successful at all, or was it always sort of in that situation you described with not being able to find many kids that wanted to participate?
Councilor Rivera, initially we had 2 young ladies who were incumbents that joined in that capacity, but what we saw, just talk with our candidates that we're trying to recruit, what really scared them was the termed position, that it was only for 3 years, and then they either had to test for police officer or their employment would come to an end. So that was kind of a scary thing for them, is what we got from some of the feedback that we had. So that's why we asked to increase the number of public safety aides, because that's been a very good program for us. We do get some officers that do come from public safety aid and some other civilian spots in our department. It's not the number that we would like to see, but this last academy did have a public safety aide who's been serving us for some time, has a great deal of experience, test, and now he's going to be working to attend the next academy. They have their physical assessment here in the next 2 weeks, so that's looking promising. But we've also seen some candidates come from our animal services officer positions as well, that transition from that position to police officer.
Did we ever have any patrol safety aides that were 18 that made it through the program that were hired on as police officers?
No, Counselor, we didn't. We had 2 young ladies that tried it out, but again, for them, the term kind of was a scary thing, where it's like you have 3 years to figure this out, or you have to find another form of employment.
Okay, that's all I had. We hadn't had any updates on the program and whether it was working or not. And then I saw this and I would ask about it. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
The other one is on the public safety radio system. I don't know, Joe or. Thanks, Mr. Beta.
How's it going?
Here. So I think I knew, but it just didn't seem to click, is the JPA between us and Santa Fe County says it will split the capital costs, and here we're not doing that. We're taking on the whole cost.
So actually, for the reroute we are, because we benefited off of that, we are splitting the cost of the SUA two with them according to the JPA. But since we benefited, we're benefiting from the PSR, from the actual reroute of the core, because we're using the state system. That's what that MOA was about, was we are taking the full response, the costs of that reroute, of the core reroute.
Okay, the cost then of the councils and the upgrades to the councils themselves that are in the RECC themselves.
So those are all part of the SUA two upgrade. We're going halfers on that with them. It's the core part of it that we have to move the actual core from the county, reroute it to the state. Those are the costs that we're taking in.
And that's all on us. That has nothing to do with county and Edgewood, where they should be involved in.
The reroute? No, because they are not utilizing the state system. We are.
Okay.
At this time, they're not utilizing it, but we're utilizing it. You know,
Anything within the facility itself, we are splitting those costs.
yes, and that's with the SUA two, and that's why that first year. But that has nothing to do with this money that the 194 that's a whole separate
All right.
amount.
That wasn't 100% clear to me, but thank you for clarifying.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Supportive of some of the changes for this bar, specifically for recreation, and the changes for the police department, and then the IT radio system. One clarification I need is from Mr. Randy Randall, just to get more clarity, since your memo was kind of sparse. If you could just say more about the transportation from the airport and how that will work with the funding, this allocation, and how much it will go towards it.
Madam Chair, Counselor, the amount that's intended towards the transportation was $100,000 out of the 180. Since that was requested and submitted, we've actually been able to enter into a standby agreement with a small transportation provider in Santa Fe, Bernard's Transportation Service, we will pay a small monthly fee of, right now it's $250. The number may have to increase if in fact he doesn't get any business out of the standby. He'll be standing by offsite and will be available to be called for transportation services. So this may preclude the use of that $100,000 for the airport transportation offsite. There is also a need, though, for additional funding for the on-site transportation that's missing to get people from the lots that are as far as from here to La Fonda into the airport. And that would be the alternate use if in fact this new idea with Bernard's Transportation Services works to alleviate the stranded passenger problem that's existed out there.
So if we provide that service, does the person that needs to get from the airport to whatever location, they pay for that? Or how does
Madam
that
Chair,
work?
Counselor, they do pay. It's an agreed upon rate for the late flight of $45 to get to one destination. If the vehicle is shared and they end up going to two destinations or three destinations, it's $10 additional for each additional destination. So two couples could come in and for $55 end up going to two separate destinations with the one service. If in fact the demand exceeds what he can handle, he would go back to the airport and finish the transportation that's required.
So then are we paying him to subsidize it for that period of time at the airport or?
Madam Chair,
I understand.
Counselor, no, we're paying him to be on standby
Okay.
so that he's not doing something else during that period of time.
And that was specifically in the evening?
It's specifically for the 10 o'clock flight coming in from Denver. That's where all the hotels have continued to tell me that we've run into the problem of late arrivals without transportation being available. Uber and Lyft prefer to stay in the downtown area where they can pick up more frequent rides, or they don't want to be up at that time of night. So it's been a problem where hotels have actually sent vehicles out to the airport to pick up people who are stranded.
And then other times, what other options are there besides the Ubers?
Madam Chair, Counselor, it appears during the regular hours, the other late flight is coming in out of Dallas. I think it's at 7:25, and it appears that there's adequate transportation available out there, or that there's enough Lyft or Uber support to handle the problem. We will, if we find there's a problem, we can get him to do the standby for the 7:25 as well.
All right, thank you. And then the other question was the contract for the Margarita Trail app. Can you tell us what that entails?
Madam Chair, Counselor, there's no contract yet. We wanted to be sure that there's funding before we
So what
try to
would,
get some-
what would it look like, you think? Like, what do you think that app would consist of?
It would be a similar app to what currently exists, where people can go on the trail with an electronic passport. They can be restricted to having it stamped just twice per day. And but it would be available for all of the now 42 different locations that participate with the passport. It's the uniqueness of the restriction on the stamping that adds a lot to the cost. When the original one was built, it was $50,000. The 80 may end up being high. We're just not sure. We had talked to the original developer, and to redo it would be more than the 50 we were told. So we don't have a specific number yet.
And when do you plan to put out the RFP for that, for this item or for this app, if the funding is approved?
Madam Chair, Council, yeah, we would put an RFP out because it's above $60,000.
But when do you plan to do that? When
This-
did you plan to do that?
As soon as we can.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Move to approve?
Second,
A motion and a second to approve this item. Can we get a roll call, please?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Villarreal,
yes.
Counselor Rivera,
Yes.
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, we have two more items pulled by Counselor Lindell. Item K, which is consideration of resolution number 2022 dash something. A resolution adopting a Midtown Community Development Plan for the Midtown Redevelopment Project. We have Lee Logston, Midtown Asset Development. We may have others on Zoom, and I think we have other subject matter experts in the room as well. And Counselor, let's see, Counselor Lindell, you pulled this. Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Lee. I'll start by saying, I think that this development plan deserves an entire council meeting to discuss it and to allow the public to have some input on it. I think that it's massive. We are committing to many, 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 many things in this plan. And it's very aspirational with very few specifics. And let me just jump to the fiscal impact report, which I am totally and completely, I'm not really sure why it's here. There isn't a number on it. And I'm completely uncomfortable. This plan has so much stuff in it. And we have no idea within $20 million of what we're approving here. And it makes me super uncomfortable. I don't know how we can have an FIR with no numbers on it. I don't know how to approve that. But let's go into some of the other specifics. I printed out the plan, so I'll go by page number. On page 8, it starts out and talks about to retain and strengthen unique characteristics and assets of those neighborhoods, minimize displacement, and promote social equity and economic vitality. What are the unique characteristics and assets of those neighborhoods as opposed to other neighborhoods?
Who's your question directed to?
Well,
Do you,
I'll take it.
do you
Well-
care or?
I'm
I
happy to
don't-
take
I
it.
don't know, Chair. This
Okay,
says
just,
it was written by Opticos. I don't even know if Opticos is is Opticos here?
No, Counselor Lindell,
Why isn't Opticos here?
well, actually, this document was largely written by Daniel Hernandez.
Well, it says Opticos on it.
Opticos did the layout and design to make this consistent with the master plan that we did. This document has existed as a Word doc with no real formatting for most of its life. And once we got it kind of finalized for consideration by the governing body and the committees, we had it formatted by Opticos to match the master plan.
okay, so maybe your question is to Mr. Hernandez, or do you
That's
care?
fine.
I was just trying to help, whatever you want.
Who answered?
Okay.
I'm not sure what the question is. I'm sorry. It was a long introduction to a question.
On page 8,
Yes.
at the top, what are the identified unique characteristics and assets of these neighborhoods?
So,
Other neighborhoods.
when this was drafted, we were extrapolating a lot of information from the Midtown engagement partners and through the public engagement process about aspirational ideas. So there's elements within the way the community development plan is written is it starts out with some aspirational guiding principles, not necessarily for implementation, but ways that we thought that strategies that would be implemented would be developed. So, you can't contest that each neighborhood within Santa Fe has its own unique characters. And as we begin to develop Midtown, that we want the process for development and the types of designs and street patterns, et cetera, we're guided by principles that are unique to Santa Fe. So that's what a planner does. That's the way that the Midtown master plan was developed and designed. And the implementation strategies, we wanted to make sure within the community development plan, we're also consistent with what's unique about Santa Fe and trying to identify what are those unique characteristics. And so we tried to build strategies around those unique characters, whether it was the social composition, meaning the community demographics, the patterns of development, street patterns that are unique to Santa Fe, but everything that we sort of heard from people on what makes Santa Fe special. Those are the things we were trying to capture. So again, there's aspirational qualities to the community development plan, and then it gets down into actual strategies that will get incorporated into RFPs.
Well, thank you, Daniel, but this talks specifically about the unique characteristics and assets of those neighborhoods. But let's go back a page where on page 7, it says The development of a new city civic center on adjacent parcels to bring government services to the center of the city is another proposal. It seems to me like I've seen in numerous places that in surveying people, they did not want city government at Midtown.
So you may be looking at old documentation because in fact, over the course of years since 2018, people had varying opinions about that. There wasn't a singular perspective. And we wanted to capture the idea that if people wanted to see government services at Midtown, that it also included community services in it so that it wasn't just a isolated building that was open, during the week and then closed at night and on the weekends, but something that was much more community oriented. So there were some guiding principles that people articulated about if government services were going to be located not on the Midtown site, but potentially on adjacent properties to the Midtown site, that there were some parameters that they wanted to pursue. So it's evolved since 2018, and I'm sure it'll continue to evolve over the next 10, 15 years.
On page 8, number 4, adaptable infrastructure, develop the physical and digital infrastructure. Through that paragraph, what does that actually mean?
So infrastructure in a modern era in the 2020s, for example, it continues to evolve. The master plan, as you know, was built on the notion of a green infrastructure so that it was adaptable. It wasn't a concrete system that was 20 feet below the ground and all the water would drain into it and offsite, but more about an adaptable infrastructure so that it was dealing with the actual realities so that it was resilient based on different flooding patterns that happen in Santa Fe and the unpredictability of those patterns as we go into the future. So the infrastructure was envisioned and designed and discussed within the master plan as an adaptable infrastructure that was resilient to the changing environmental, the changing environment that we're currently facing in climate change. So again, you're reading from the introduction. If I can help you, you're reading from the introduction. So the introduction just sets the aspirational approach to the way that the planning team was creating both the community development and master plan. So these were guiding principles, and we wanted to let the public know that we heard their guiding principles, and those would serve as the foundation for implementation, both in the master plan as well as the community development plan.
Page 14, under intent, the fourth block, strengthen, incentivize, and increase, talking about affordable housing that focuses on community stabilization of adjacent neighborhoods. How does that happen? And what's the cost of how that happens?
Well, again, the intent is different than a strategy. So the way that the community development plan was structured, which is a standard way that a lot of plans are structured, so that one, it just says, what's our objectives here? What are the big causes, issues that we heard that we want to address? So there's an intent to address those, and that's what that section does. The next section is the methods of implementation. What tools do we have to achieve those intents? And then you see those 3 boxes there. And then the next is, all right, let's talk about what strategies we have available to us to implement. Some of them may be long-term, some of them may be short-term, some of them are so immediate. But again, as we redevelop the site, these are the strategies that we will deploy whenever it's possible, whenever it's feasible, whether it's an RFP, whether it's a ground lease we want to negotiate, it's the reuse of public space, or the way that parks and streets are used. So anyway, so that's the way that the community development plan was structured. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we were doing at Midtown, we were paying attention to the positive and potential negative impacts of development in Midtown. We heard a lot about the potential for displacement and gentrification and the negative impacts of gentrification. And we wanted to see how we might mitigate those. So this section talks a lot about housing affordability, so that as markets change in Santa Fe and evolve, maybe even due to the development here at Midtown, we want to incorporate affordable housing so that begins to stabilize the community as one of our intents. And so we talk about specific strategies in the section of how we would achieve that.
Well, going back to what I first said, what concerns me is that we are adopting this. And there's a lot of generalization in here that we are holding people in the future to a lot of aspirational things that it's just not very specific. It's very aspirational, and that's terrific, but this will come back and someone will say, well, we passed that resolution and we said under methods of implementation, affordable housing finance terms. How do we affect those? How do we?
Well, Alexandra is there. She can talk about that. But whenever we make a commitment through either a land transfer that's publicly owned property for the development of affordable housing, as well as financing that we make available to developers, there are terms that require certain performance, both in development as well as the operation. But Alexandra, you probably, you're there and maybe want to address that.
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, Daniel's exactly right. We have these incentives written into our code, and the New Mexico Affordable Housing Act allows a governmental entity to create different terms, more favorable terms, lower interest rates, no interest rates, for the providers of affordable housing or the developers of affordable housing. Madam Chair, if I may, I also just wanted to respond to Councilor Lindell's earlier comments, because I think we've been bringing so much stuff forward that it's a little confusing to some extent, like how all of these different plans and policy documents fit together, because the master plan is the regulatory item, so that allows us to do this work at Midtown. This is a policy document. So what this is saying is, this is what we want to get out of development at Midtown. So that's kind of, I think you're struggling with that balance between aspiration and detail, because the real detail comes with the financial tools and the RFPs and the actual disposition of property. And that's, all of those decisions will come back to the council. So that's, that's the point at which we understand the market and we know what other resources we can leverage to achieve what we're setting out in this document as reflecting what the community wants at this site.
I appreciate that, Alexandra. I'm just deeply concerned that the aspiration of this document is holding, I mean, this is a massive policy document. And I think many, many, many paragraphs in here could be their own resolution. What we are committing to in this document is huge. And I don't personally have enough detail on a lot of it. Let's go to the next page, page 16, under A1. For inclusionary homeownership units, include affordability controls or deed restrictions that impose resale restrictions and never expire. But that's a lot to hold a council to. That's a lot to hold future homeowners to. That doesn't really allow people to gain equity in their homes, which is what we try to do with home ownership, or what we used to try to do. I think that agreeing to that without specifics is asking an awful lot when it's in a paragraph in an aspirational document. The next paragraph talking about shared equity models, land trust structures, other forms of long-term community control or participation. I understand that it's aspirational, but this is without a doubt, the passage of this is holding us to concepts and policies that we have very, very, very little specifics. And I'm not comfortable with that.
So if I may, I don't know if there's a question in there, but we're in the strategy section now, so it does get a little bit more specific. We're no longer aspirational, but the way that these specifics are implemented over the course of a long development period is that it begins to say to the public, look, we heard you. We know that long-term affordability is a priority. And these policies, since they're publicly owned property, allows the city to pursue these. So we can issue an RFP and ask for models, see whether we get them. It's not we're not saying we're requiring it. We're saying that we're going to pursue these things and we're going to incorporate them into objectives within RFPs to see what we get back. The goal is to begin stimulating the market to go in directions that we want to see. One, long-term affordability, stronger ways of community control, whether it's through housing trusts, whether it's models around affordability where participation in community residents have some governance structure, but we want to begin pushing the market to begin be responsive to things that we heard that were important for communities. These are practices that are happening all over the country, and we want to see more of this happening in Santa Fe. I mean, this is exactly what we're hearing from people, and we were looking at models from around the country that can be implemented in Santa Fe. Again, this is it. What we're saying is that we are going to pursue these things. We're going to include them RFP. Let's push the market to achieve these objectives that communities desire in Santa Fe. But there are also policies that cities around the country are pursuing right now and have been for many years, actually, many of them, who are experiencing similar housing crisis to Santa Fe.
Daniel, that felt very condescending, to be absolutely honest with you. And just because other cities in the country are pursuing it doesn't mean that I have all the background and information of every other city in the country to know why this is good for us.
Alex Ladd had something to add. Did you want to hear?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, I did want to reassure you that anything that was written in this plan that I felt like we weren't already doing or couldn't do as part of our established program got edited out for the affordability section. And this in particular, that item, I don't know. The affordability controls and deed restrictions, we do that now. So every time a price restricted home is sold, there's a lien that's held by the city that makes up the difference between market value and the subsidized price. It never goes away, but the homeowner still is able to reap all of the benefits of the equity and any increased value of their property, or all of the equity that they earn by paying off their loan. So at the end of the day, this amount was never theirs to begin with because they got to buy the home at a reduced value, but it doesn't dismiss. Occasionally there are some subsidy types of products that will have a term and will be forgiven. The city's original inclusionary zoning program, as soon as the primary mortgage was paid off, the affordability lien would go away. But the other thing that the original program contained, and when this was rewritten, it continued it, but we've since taken it out, was a shared equity requirement. So you were in a situation at the end of the day where that homeowner not only had to pay back the affordability lien, but then they had to pay back a certain amount of that earned equity or increase in value to the city got to say, well, we subsidize 30% of the value of your initial home purchase. So we get 30% of your equity. And we don't do that anymore because it felt like it was too punishing and it felt like it was too restrictive and that we were actually hampering people's abilities to move up in the market because now they were more financially secure, or if they had to sell for a financial reason or a divorce or an illness or something, that they weren't also hammered and told at the closing table, well, you owe the city all this money. So we did take that out of the requirement.
Okay, because I've certainly seen that happen. All right, on page 18. Neighborhood stabilization. I spent a fair amount of time looking and reading and doing research on gentrification and neighborhood stabilization. I'm sure that I don't know what they're doing in all other parts of the country, but I haven't really seen great success in how this happens. What is the strategy for this?
Well, again, I apologize if I came across condescending. That wasn't my intention. My intention was to say that we did a lot of research and looked at a lot of examples and best promising practices around the country, and discussed them with community members during this process. So I apologize if it came off otherwise. Oftentimes a city, when development is happening or there's a mass market change in communities that are affecting low-income households particularly, or people who are feeling displaced, threatened, and or actually being displaced from their community, cities will dedicate resources to creating a stabilization plan. And it will do a lot of things. So it will focus resources for rehabbing existing homes for seniors who are feeling the pressures of displacement, finding empty parcels to redevelop for affordable housing, nurturing community advocates to help residents and or tenants who are experiencing bad landlord practices and helping them understand their tenant rights. So anyway, a lot of strategies come into place, and then the cities usually partner with community organizations, foundations, and others to dedicate resource to implement programs that help people stay in their communities if they choose to. But always housing affordability is one of the major links to it. So that is the way that people are creating neighborhood stabilization plans. And so we know that Chainbreaker, as well as the city, worked with PolicyLink a few years ago, and Alexandra can talk more about that, on some of the strategies that they come up with during that time. And we want to look at those and prioritize ones that we may want to implement sooner than later, particularly as Midtown gets developed. But Alexandra, you may have something to add to that.
Well, on page 18, under the neighborhood stabilization, under 2, it clearly does talk about issuing an RFP, and each part of that, A, B, C, each one of them deserves a total and complete explanation. Under C, 1, it's talking about developing an overlay district. By passing this, if that's in an RFP, we are committing to that. And that item is based on beyond recovery policy recommendations to prevent evictions and promote housing security in Santa Fe. That report probably should be an addendum on this document. So
Okay.
we are committing to developing an overlay district.
No, the RFP says that in the scope of work, it would be to analyze the viability, legality, economic impact, advantages, and disadvantages of an overlay district. It does not say to implement one, but to analyze it.
What I see under number 2, Daniel, it says issue an RFP that includes the following scope of work at a minimum.
To
And,
analyze,
pardon me?
to analyze the viability, legality, economic impact, and advantages, not to implement, but to analyze it. There may be no advantage to it. And if there's no advantage to it, it's done collaboratively with the community to understand what the disadvantages and advantages are, and or what is the breadth of that? What does it actually mean, and how does it get implemented, or should it get implemented in Santa Fe? So it's not saying that it's to create it, it's to analyze its advantages and disadvantages, its legality, its viability, et cetera.
Well, there's one thing in here, policy wise, I certainly like, and it's the limiting of short-term rentals. Let's move on. It's in tight. Page 20. Under economic development, prioritize resource, number 3, prioritize resources from the Office of Economic Development to facilitate business location and development within the Midtown District. Really, what does that mean?
Well, we want to make sure that, I mean, as you know, the Office of Economic Development has different business tools and strategies for finding locations for businesses. Rich's office gets calls every day for, where might I locate my business? It's at affordable rents, et cetera, et cetera. So we just want to make sure that part of the strategy is to include Midtown and possibly link them to developers who are developing mixed-use buildings with commercial spaces down below, so that there's opportunities for businesses seeking location in Santa Fe and a relocation within Santa Fe with Midtown as an option.
Go down a little bit further under entrepreneurialism, number 3. It is a commitment to implement the LEAD ND. I really don't know what that is or what the cost of it would be.
It's not a cost. It's so basically the LEAD neighborhood development, when we passed the master plan, included a series of cross-referenced the LEED neighborhood development program, which is a United States Green Building certification program. But there's a credit in there that basically says that food production is allowed within a new master plan area. So we wanted to be clear and specific within the master plan that community gardening is an allowable use in certain open space areas within Midtown. So we implemented it. It's been implemented within the master plan.
So is it use, or is it saying that will be a use?
It's an allowable use.
Just an allowable use?
Yes.
Because when I look at Appendix A, which that's referenced to, it really doesn't give me very much information at all. Same for the next page where it talks about Appendix A, neighborhood development. It doesn't give much information at all. Let's go on to page 22. Under methods of implementation, Metropolitan Redevelopment Act. So have we made a decision that we will be doing a Metropolitan Redevelopment Act?
This document references that the city will be pursuing establishing a Metropolitan Redevelopment Act. It doesn't say that it is establishing it by means of approving this document, but that it is pursuing the MRA.
It seems like an assumption of this document.
We can talk to legal about ways to making that clear, but yeah.
So is it or isn't it?
Is it, or isn't it what?
Is it an assumption that we're doing an MRA?
This document says that we will be pursuing an MRA. It doesn't say that it's been approved, nothing else, but that we will be pursuing it as part of the governance structure for the Midtown site.
On to page 23, arts and culture, placemaking and placekeeping. Number 2, include a criteria on solicitations for commercial development to include public art with local artists.
So when we issue RFPs, when we know that there are areas within the RFP for the possibility for the relocation of some of the existing commercial public art that we want to what's the word I want? We want to establish a preference, a point for relocating some of the existing public art onto sites within the redevelopment area.
So this is a relocation and not a requirement for developers to have to provide and purchase new public art.
No, where something is a requirement, we use the word requirement. Yeah, this is just like we're going to list it as a series of kind of objectives within RFPs, and there's a lot of that in here. We'll see how we get, if we get responses. But we want to encourage certain types of development and certain types of things to get done within the RFP process. We know that developers want to be competitive with each other. So to the extent that they're going to go after some of these things that we establish as preferences or priorities, we'll put that in the criteria so that we can evaluate the proposals based on meeting these different objectives and criteria.
Under public space programming and uses, is this committing us to a new public outreach program?
At some point, yes. I mean, someone is going to have to continue doing the public programming. There's a public park there, so whether and similar to the discussion we even had tonight about uses or programs during some of the festival times of the year. We anticipate that the open space within Midtown will require some entity doing public programming.
Do you have any idea how many RFPs are required, called for in this document?
I'm sure that there's a lot. We're going to be issuing a lot of RFPs for parcel development. There's very few for actual services. This is one of them. The other one you identified previously, which was for the neighborhood stabilization plan. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure there's any others. Yeah. But the RFPs for land disposition, there will be several.
Under governance and planning on the same page, I think that every one of those deserves its own rather lengthy conversation. For each one of those to have one paragraph in this document, I think sells them all very, very short and doesn't really give them the due. I mean, number 3, if an MRA is established, and it goes on to talk about appointing a commission, and these things deserve long conversations. I mean, we're committing a lot, be it from this council, be it from future councils. We're committing a lot. And as I said, I've never seen a resolution rescinded. And once it's passed, we are committed to this because we won't rescind it. There's an awful lot in here to think about. Is it really how we want to do this? I'm not comfortable appointing a commission based on this paragraph and statements like, and development of publicly owned real estate assets to the extent permitted by law. I don't really know what that means. On the next page, community outreach and involvement. This also deserves a much, much bigger conversation. What are we really committing to?
So when we dispose of properties, we dispose of them through a development and disposition agreement. And those disposition agreement talk about performance, both on schedule for when the development will be completed and operating, the types of things that they've committed to, types of tenancy that they've committed to, et cetera, et cetera. So part of it will be that during their development process, that they will have a public engagement process. We heard is this it? Are we ever going to be able to talk about development of individual projects at Midtown? And that was a big community comment we heard. And so again, in the lead neighborhood development, there is a credit there. There's a discussion in the program that talks about how developers can engage communities in their development. So we want to make sure that individual projects, developers for individual projects will be required to have some form of engagement process. And not all of them will have that, but many of the projects that people were specifically interested in, they wanted to make sure that there was ongoing, or at least through the development process, public engagement. It's not a city responsibility to be the developer responsibility.
The next page, 26, that to me deserves a much, much larger conversation. Page 27, phase 1D, residential, condominium / rental. I don't know anybody that is pursuing condominium financing these days. It's almost non-existent. I don't know that this project, I mean, how many financial institutions in this town will touch a condominium? None. Only HUD approved condominium projects. And I think that there's a couple. It's almost impossible to finance condominiums. You know something about this that I don't?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, HomeWise has a couple of condo projects that they're financing. So it is possible. You are right. It is.
They're just about
difficult.
impossible in resale to get them financed. And HomeWise, good for them that they would do that because no one else wants to do it. And I've sold a lot of property. And if it's a condo, good luck finding financing. Just isn't available. So saying that we're going to do a form of ownership and a form of building of condominiums, I personally would rethink that. Townhomes are very, very different from condominiums. And the financing for condominiums is really pretty much non-existent. So thank you, Chair, for indulging me for this. It is too aspirational for me with way too many commitments into the future that I have absolutely no idea of what we're committing to financially. I don't know how we can have an FIR that does not have a number on it. I don't know how do we have an FIR that does not have one number on it?
Counselor Lindell, if I might, we chose to, because there are so many unknowns and non-specifics at this point, we chose to go with the narrative, and those narratives do contain numbers.
They do contain numbers? I haven't seen them.
I've got the FIR up on my screen. We have a narrative for expenditures and we have a narrative for revenue. It doesn't have any of the little blanks filled out with specific numbers.
Let's have some specific numbers, because where did we get the big numbers from if we didn't have specific numbers to add up to get those numbers?
Councilor Lindell, members of the commission, the big numbers came from the work that Strategic Economics did for us and the analysis they did, the presentations that we've made to Finance Committee. And, you know, we had to correct some of those assumptions, but the numbers that are in this FIR are based on the work that Dina Belzer did with her group.
And if I remember correctly, we talked about infrastructure, which I think was in that document at 24 million, but Ms. Belzer said, oh, we know it'll be a lot more than that. Well, how about the real number? How do I trust those numbers when I'm given a number and then told in a presentation, well, we know that's not the real number. We know it'll be more than that. That doesn't make any sense.
And
the numbers didn't add up.
Daniel, maybe you can help me out if I don't phrase this right, or if I'm not given the full answer, but
I don't hear a question yet. Yeah.
I'll just answer and say that to my knowledge, any inconsistency that you or any of the other counselors pointed out, Dina went back and corrected, and we as a group discussed and went back and corrected those, and ultimately came back with updated presentations that corrected those errors. Now, whether, you know, one agrees with the numbers or not is one issue, but correcting the errors is something we did.
Well, I would ask you to go back and watch the meeting about the infrastructure, and we certainly did not have a re-reporting on the infrastructure. Daniel, I'm sure that you remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Belzer said that I was very good at finding her typos. It wasn't a typo, it was a mistake. And we never got a re-report on the infrastructure of what the real costs were expected to be. Talking about millions and millions of dollars. We're throwing numbers around, but there's no real numbers on an FIR for this document. Being asked to approve a document that has an accompanying FIR with no numbers on it. Thank you, Chair.
Do we have a motion on this item?
I would move to postpone.
Is there a second? That motion fails for lack of a second.
Move to approve.
Motion is second. Further conversation, Counselor Cassett.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure, the understanding of how this document is utilized from my understanding of this as a policy document. And I kind of start to think about this. Never mind. I'm not going to go with this analogy. It doesn't quite work. But really what we are looking at here are what are the policy goals that we're trying to achieve? And the tools for how to achieve those policy goals are suggested here, but are not yet implemented by the adoption of this resolution. Am I understanding that correctly?
Madam Chair, Counselor Cassett, that's exactly right, because this plan is based on what the community told us they wanted at this site. So we were trying to take the intent and the vision expressed by the community and ask ourselves as planning professionals and housing professionals and people who have a lot of development experience. Well, what would the tools to get to that vision be? Like, what are all the possibilities? Like, how could we identify and create a framework for understanding what's at our disposal and what the opportunities are?
Thank you. And so if I understand how this process essentially starts to work from here on out, we do know we have the parcelization of Midtown. We have this master plan. We're working with a bit more of a form-based development process. And so as we start to go out to RFP for development, whether that be sale, whether that be long-term lease, whether that be looking at a land trust, as those RFPs go out, for each different component, because there's residential components, there's commercial, there's economic development, there's mixed use. These policy goals will be really driving the structure of that RFP. So at that time, we might say, hey, we would like to do, I don't know, a co-housing project. And with that co-housing project, we want it to be on a community land trust or we're looking at a variety of these different models. Tell us what you got, give us what you would like to see. And then basically it will be graded upon how well they meet the policy goals that are really written out here. So these are really policy goals as opposed to policy laws. I think that there's a bit of a difference there in how we speak about policy. A lot of times we're making policy, we're developing laws, things that you have to stick to. These kind of similar to a lot of the tenets that lay out in the general plan. I will go back to my original analogy, which does hold future councils and governing bodies to them, because these are really long-term documents, which is why there is a little bit of this nebulous nature to it, because we know that it has to both provide direction and understanding of where we are moving, but also be flexible enough to be developed over a long-term process. That's how I read this. That's how I've understood it throughout our presentations. Am I correct in that understanding?
Madam Chair, Counselor Cassett, I would say you are definitely correct. And I would also say that this is a similar approach to how we allocate housing funds. So we're not saying, hey, we want this many units at these prices in this design style. What we're saying is we want to serve the affordable housing needs of our community. Providers, developers, tell us what you can do. And so then they're responding to us. And it may be that HomeWise wants to do a home ownership project and the Housing Trust wants to do a tax credit project, but they have to demonstrate that they're capable of doing that they can raise leverage funds from other sources, that they have the ability to create that housing and meet that need. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind too, is that the RFPs themselves will be very, very specific, but they'll also be performance-based so that we'll have choices between two different kinds of projects that meet the need, that are consistent with the vision expressed in this plan. And then it'll be up to the governing body and the MRA, if that's the direction we go in, to make that decision.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Good. I'm glad I'm understanding this correctly. So I appreciate that. I'll just add two more things very quickly, given the hour. One, I would agree this is an extremely aspirational document. And I have been cautious. I've said multiple times, Midtown cannot, we cannot put upon Midtown shoulders solving all the problems of the city. I'm going to play the other card now, which is that we also cannot afford to not be as aspirational as possible with Midtown. Midtown has to strike that balance of there is so much opportunity and there's so much that can be done here. There are multiple ways that those goals can be achieved. And I think that it will be the challenge that we will have to face, as well as future governing bodies of with these variety of tools to meet these policy goals, that we will have to navigate that and see what the market will support at the time, what nonprofits we have that can support that at the time. And And so this is a very aspirational document, and I don't think we can afford to not be extremely aspirational with Midtown. As has been said, I remember when I was running for governing body for the seat, and there was an event on Midtown, and they were talking about what a unicorn this is, you know, to have 64 acres smack dab in the middle of a city to redevelop. I mean, that's just unheard of. And so while I always am cautious, you know, maybe it's because it is my district. I feel very protective of Midtown that, you know, we don't lay all of the problems of the city at Midtown's feet. We also cannot squander the opportunity. And I think that some of that opportunity just cannot be quantified in dollars. I did want to also take an opportunity, if as best I can, as the representative of that district, to talk about the unique characteristics of the neighborhoods and what I see as the unique characteristics of the neighborhoods surrounding Midtown, that I want to ensure are protected. A lot of the neighborhoods surrounding the Midtown development are older neighborhoods. Some of the families that I have had the pleasure of meeting who live there have been there for, 50, 60 years. Some of them were the very first homeowners of the house. It is largely residential. It is really a cross section of the city, although around Midtown and District 4, at least, you have a really strong middle class neighborhood, working class neighborhood, a lot of families. Franklin Miles Park is an incredible asset there. Herb Martinez Park is another one that we are really doing a lot of work on. And I know some of the concerns that I've heard from my constituents is about this displacement, is about making sure that the characteristic that is maintained is that there are these families that have known each other for generations, and these houses that have been there, and that they've lived in them for generations, while also welcoming new young families into it. And that has been one of my primary concerns with Midtown. As excited as I am and as much opportunity as I see with this property, really paying close attention to the very, very real threat of displacement on those neighborhoods. The opportunity that might occur when people buy up properties and, you know, renovate a home and sell it for much more than could possibly be afforded by individuals who are living there now. To be quite honest, the houses are much more expensive than a lot of people who are living there now could afford at the time being. So I hope that kind of starts to answer the question of when I'm thinking about the characteristic of those neighborhoods around Midtown, and what is really worth protecting. That is what I'm seeing there. And it is, you know, one of the kind of most, you know, well, we see a lot of it, but, you know, District 4 is a pretty dense area. So you are really seeing these middle class neighborhoods, these families, these sense of communities, that we do need to help preserve, and we are starting to lose them a little bit. And I worry about what Midtown could do to that. So I do really appreciate the focus on how we start to grapple with this incredible challenge of anti-displacement, because it's not something that has been easily solved in other parts of the country. And so I do, I think that it's important that we really struggle with that and try to solve that as best as we can. And I will yield the floor. Thank you so much.
Councilwoman Villarreal.
Madam Chair.
And I'll just remind the committee, the hour is late. We still have one
Right
more.
before I'm
item.
gonna talk, just kidding. I actually am gonna, my questions are really more around quality of life. And so I'm gonna wait till my other committee opportunities to talk about this. I don't have any specific financial questions for this committee. So I'll be moving it on so I can hear it in other committee opportunities. Thank you.
Councilor Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I too had some concerns about that FIR, and I do see the numbers written into the narratives. Is there any way those can be put into their general spots, or is that too difficult? I know it sounds to me, based on all the questioning, that you're trying to build in some flexibility and have that flexibility, but is there a way to get specific on any of the numbers?
excuse me, Councilor Rivera, members of the commission, committee. It depends on a bit. We have some funding laid aside and available that is dependent on completing our audit, and we don't know exactly when that's going to happen. We have an idea, but so we have some funding that is available, but is kind of locked up right now. We're pursuing other funding at the legislature, but a lot of it just depends on the potential grants and so forth that Public Works can pursue. And also part of it just depends on what becomes of the current real estate market and what kind of response we get to the RFPs. I don't know if Daniel, you have more to add to that.
I don't.
We went with the narrative that stated that it really is kind of hard to tell at this point.
Okay, understandable. And, it's not the typical way that we see an FIR. I think that's the heartache with it, but yeah, I think the flexibility with this, I'm glad that we're moving forward. I know there's still a lot of questions and I think those will be worked out over time. Again, it's not the typical way we go about doing business. So I think that's the heartache we have, but I do appreciate all the hard work and the flexibility that you need with this. I think it's a tough task. So that's all I had, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I would just add, so back to the FIR, the things that you have listed in the narrative, I think part of another reason, and maybe you can confirm this, that they're not listed out in the line items under expenditures and revenue is they don't really fit there at the moment. So the form, in essence, does you a bit of a disservice because it wasn't really built to outline the financing on the expenditure side and the revenue side of this particular project. This is such a, back to Councilor Cassett's point, unicorn of a project and property. It doesn't lend itself really to this form.
And Madam Chair, I would also add that the legislation that's being considered, the resolution itself, it's not as if we are bringing forward a bill that would imply that we're going to fund something specific in the site where we would have an actual number. So I think that everyone is struggling a little bit with that, where it just feels like we know the numbers are out there. We don't know what they are yet. And I had a professor in planning school who used to say, it's better to be generally right than exactly wrong. And so I think, that was kind of what we were playing with too, was any number we put on there is going to be wrong.
Yeah.
It might be almost right, but it's not going to be exactly right. And so this narrative was a way to kind of at least create the context for what we think the future costs are, but it doesn't, adoption of this resolution doesn't assume that all of those costs are going to be borne out.
Okay, and Mr. Logsdon, you did indicate that you went over, and I do remember the meeting where Councilor Lindell went over the assumptions that were being made. I think made some observations that you all agreed with. You said you went back and did some revisions. I think it would be helpful for us to see that presentation in its revised form. I don't know necessarily that we need to have a presentation, but I think to have the handout in its revised form would be helpful to see how you've resolved the things that were identified.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. The first two presentations got altered and then or altered. I'm trying to say.
Evolved.
Right. And were uploaded to PrimeGov on those dates as.
Okay, if you wouldn't,
but
and that
we've
is
since
so
done it
cumbersome.
again, so.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind just sending in particular this committee and perhaps the whole council.
Absolutely.
And I guess then the other thing is, I just want to confirm that some of the long conversations are still going to come. And they're going to come in, I think maybe it was Councilor Cassidy who said that as we employ our tools for implementing this vision, this aspirational ideas for what we can do with this unicorn of a property that has this incredible number of opportunities for us. There are going to still be very many long conversations, still many long decisions, still solid decisions with more detail and, committing us in real financial ways as we move along. So those are kind of under coming attractions. This isn't, we're just doing this and we won't see you guys for a while. You're going to be back and back and back, and we're going to be talking a lot about this going forward.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Councilor Lindell.
So on the FIR, I want to be sure that the estimated 23 million capital outlay fiscal year 2023 to 2025 is based on those updated numbers. And then on the revenue narrative, I would point out the caveat. Well, let's even start before that. The near-term revenue sources. We don't know about the GRT bond, the land swap revenue. I don't know that we're sure of that. Land sales, we probably will have. Legislative appropriations. I don't know if those are existing or if that's aspirational. Midtown land sales up to 10 million. Federal infrastructure funds, I don't know that those have been committed to us, have they? Do we have a commitment for 10 million from the feds for infrastructure? I don't think so.
Not 10 anyhow. But I believe we do have some 1 or 2 million that is available, but I would need to go back.
Let's make sure on these things, huh? I mean, are these real revenue sources, or is this, we're hoping? We have an expenditure statement of an estimated 23 million outlay in fiscal year 2023 to 2025. And in the revenue narrative that I'm looking at, we don't have a GRT bond at this point. We don't know about the land swap revenue, the land sales, the legislative appropriations, federal infrastructure funds. So the caveat says at this point, it's difficult to predict the fiscal year that any of this revenue will occur, or if it will occur. Should probably also be on there. Where did we get the number 10 million in federal infrastructure funds? Who put that in? Okay, no answer. That's a problem.
So, Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, I mean, I really appreciate you bringing up these points. This information in here was developed through the strategic economics analysis. So they were looking at all of the possibilities out there and then how much we would need and what was likely to come from these different sources. So you're absolutely right. There's not a guarantee here, but it's also, this is where this amount is likely to come from.
I appreciate that. But they're not real numbers. There's no absoluteness to any of them. And we're being asked to approve a lot based on numbers that are hopeful. Thank you, Chair.
Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify this expenditure section, you have a operating expenses for new infrastructure. When you say operating expenses, what are you envisioning that to be?
Councilor BRL, that would include, for instance, operational expenses involved in maintaining a new plaza, in maintaining whatever park.
For the city?
Space.
Okay.
So yeah, those are, and they're not expected to be incurred for at least 3 fiscal years because, you know, we're not going out there and laying down a plaza first thing, you know, we have larger fish to fry in terms of roads and things like that to figure out.
I think there are some that we do know though for expenditures like any contractuals work that we anticipate in fiscal year 23. I mean, I think you all know or at least have an idea about if there's other contracts, you know, people that are on contract now are going to continue working with us in this next year. So that would be something we could actually add. The other thing is, I don't know what that looks like, but when we get to demolition, I don't know at what point that would be, but that is a cost and an expenditure that I don't know if we can guess now, because I don't know when that would happen. Do you have a idea about demolition?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I know it's phased, it's planned in phases. Daniel, do you know if the demolition of everything that's going to be torn down, it is phased over time, right?
It is, yeah. I mean, we had a long meeting this morning on the infrastructure and developing an infrastructure plan, actually, and it includes the demolition. We wanted to phase it based on cash flow, and the cash flow is also dependent on when we're able to unlock some of the state funds that are coming to the city for the redevelopment of Midtown. So we don't have exact dates, but we anticipate that within the next year or two, we will demolish the buildings that are slated for demolition, as well as begin the infrastructure development. But again, it's dependent on the release of those funds to the city. The demolition of the buildings will also help on reducing operating expenses. There are operating expenses to maintaining an empty building. So we want to move as early as possible on that as well, but we don't have exact time frame. I would say within the first 2 years.
It sounds like we probably wouldn't be able to guess the demolition costs but I guess I'm thinking that you all know if there's a staff, the contracts that are going to be moving forward this year that could be added in this, at least whether it's in the column or not, it probably should be in the narrative so that we know as well. That's like one thing to also anticipate for our costs.
Are we doing all the demolition? Or will some of that be done by developers that we contract?
Good question.
So I guess that's the other thing. So you don't have to answer that. It's
Anyway, just the things that we do know, especially if we're having potentially more contractual work that we know of, it would be good to list that.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, one thing that occurs to me is that maybe we look at the expenses in terms of the implementation of this policy plan. And to your point, like that does involve contracts with specialists to get us to a point where we can actually parcelize the land and dispose of it. Because I think these infrastructure costs, they're not actually related to the implementation of policy. They're related to the physical realization of the development that reflects the policy. So maybe
That's a good distinction.
Yeah, maybe
So
that's something we could do.
in that vein, then I think that's what we do need to explain as it relates to the plan implementation policy. Not all the nuts and bolts like you're talking about development with the demolition, et cetera. So, okay, thank you. We could probably make those changes before we.
Yeah,
hear this.
I think there's some things that can happen here.
Thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Can we get a roll call?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Councilor Cassett,
Yes.
Councilor Lindell, Councilor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Rivera.
Yes.
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, we are
Motion
on to our last item of the night, item L, HIJKL. Let's see here. Oh, goodness. I don't think I'm going to read all of this, but basically, Counselor Garcia is here with us. He's one of the sponsors. An ordinance relating to electric bicycles, doing a whole variety of things. And Counselor Lindell, you pulled this item.
I did, thank you. I have a couple of concerns about this. I think what's here is mostly fine, but I think that we're missing some things. And one thing is we don't address electric scooters. We don't address, and these are types of transportation that, you know, at best I could get on an electric bicycle. I'm not getting on an electric scooter. I'm not getting on a one wheel. I'm not getting on an electric unicycle, and I'm not getting on an electric skateboard. But I know a lot of people that do, and they use them as transportation. Interestingly enough, I see people jump off the rail runner with an electric unicycle, which doesn't have a seat, but you stand on it. And I see them zipping to work from the rail runner. And I understand, even though it's clear I'm not up on what happens in most cities, that they're becoming quite a popular mode of transportation, and that we probably need to address these if we're working on this ordinance, because I think that it's going to come up. The only thing that I saw, I think those things need to be addressed. The one thing I did see that I'm not sure how it gets fixed or what's to be done about it. On the top of page 4, it says under 16 can't operate a class 3. But under 16 can operate a class 1 or 2 in a bike lane, which is super dangerous because they're going so slow. I don't think that that's necessarily our best trade-off. And I don't know what it needs to be fixed, but I don't think that it's erring on the side of safety to put someone under 16 in a bike lane on a bike that has a maximum speed of 15 out in traffic. So those are my concerns with this. I'm also not sure about any of those 4 other types of transportation that I talked about, how those are allowed and with their speed on bike trail, on our trail system. But I think if we're trying to make this ordinance into modern times and safer, those are probably some things that need to be addressed. So those are just my comments on it, because the bike speed thing with the 16-year-old, that is a concern for me. I don't think that's a good trade-off. And the other 4 modes of transportation, they're here and they're only going to get bigger. So we probably need to address those at the same time we're doing this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is there a motion?
Councilor Lindell, or there's a motion, or can I answer the comments of?
They
Councilor
were
Lindell.
comments. Counselor, did you want a response?
I will let the city assistant attorney to comment or respond to the first comment that there are mode of transportation that are missing in this bill. But your comment on the that 16-year-old cannot ride a class 3 e-bike. Class 3 e-bike can go up to 28 mph compared to conventional or manual bicycle, or the class 2 bicycle, which is only 20 mph. And this bill only refers to our streets and sidewalks. It doesn't refer to bicycling on trail or using an e-bike on trails. And there are now studies that's coming out that it's very dangerous for underage to ride a class 3 e-bike. One example is the fatal accident that happened in New York. I'm not expert on bicycling, especially riding an e-bike. So what BPAC members are saying is it's very different to ride class 3 e-bike. And can you please add something?
One minor point of clarification. There's nothing specific in the bill regarding trails or bike paths because these the electronic bicycles are defined out of being motor vehicles. It clarifies that for the ones that are considered electronic bicycles, which is to say with that speed cap of 28 miles per hour. I'm sorry. I thought I was close enough. Is that better? Okay. Madam Chairman, Counselor, the definitions do affect the rules elsewhere in the city code about what is permissible to ride on city trails and on city bike paths by defining the electric bicycles rather than electronic out of motor vehicles. The result is that they are clearly permitted on bike paths and on the city trails where bicycling is. So one point of clarification. I will say it's not the role of the city attorney's office to advise on policy. The limitation for the 16-year-olds came to our office in the draft bill that came from BPAC. So that is the source of that. There was discussion though at one point in an article circulated about death of a younger teenager, I think 14 or 15, on an e-bike. So there are incidents that are occurring that there was an effort to address. Also, as regards the other modes of transportation, I don't think the intent is so much to exclude them or intentionally leave them in a limbo as to just affirmatively address the status of e-bikes, because at least one of these classes, the class 2s, can be operated without pedaling, which means under current definitions, it is a motor vehicle. They are almost certainly being ridden on city bike paths. And so the intent here was to clarify the role and operation of e-bikes specifically, rather than a sort of larger point aimed at addressing, all the modes of electronic transportation or electric transportation.
Also, may I please add that there's a need to focus our effort on e-bikes compared to other modes of transportation like electric scooters, because the SFMPO estimated that in prior pandemic, 10% of bicycles in Santa Fe were only 10%. But in 2022, the estimate is now 30 to 40%. And so the trend is going up. It's higher compared to electric scooters or electric unicycles. But I see those in Santa Fe, but the numbers are still comparatively lower compared to electric bicycles.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we have more discussion, more questions? Counselor Lindell?
I just think that if we're doing this to not define these and put these in the ordinance, just, it would make a lot of sense to me to do that. And not addressing bike speed on trails. I think that most of us have had numerous constituent calls, or certainly I have, about people riding bikes on trails way too fast. And folks wanting speed limit signs on the trails. I think and the fine on this is changing from 25 to 100. I still don't think that the trade-off on class 3, 28 mile per hour with a 16-year-old and putting them out on a bike lane at 15 miles an hour is a good safety trade-off. I don't believe that that's good sense. But those are just my opinions on it. As it stands, I won't support it, but because I'd like to see it go further. Thank you, Chair.
Okay,
Chair, there's a
yes,
procedural matter I'd like to raise. Romello noticed before the hearing on this bill started that the title still reads on line 15 of page 1 that it is defining electric bicycles as not being vehicles, when in fact an amendment in the Quality of Life Committee changed that. And because that title was published with the agenda for this meeting, I'm concerned that there may be an Open Meetings Act issue when we're in fact in part of the bill doing the opposite of what the title says. So I'd recommend an amendment to change line 15 tonight. And then,
yeah, we're not going to do that tonight. Sorry. Because we have to have it drafted and we don't have anybody here to draft it. Yeah. Jeez. When is this supposed to be heard at governing body?
Madam Chair, it's on the calendar for next Wednesday, although I think it's unlikely to be heard that day.
I believe there's been a noticing issue with this. Am I correct? I got CC'd on a chain today discussing issues with noticing because there was some confusion around what happened in quality of life. And so I don't believe that this bill has been noticed yet. Was that my understanding from that email that I came in halfway through the conversation?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Counselor, I'm sorry, I don't think I was included on that chain. It was mentioned to me before the meeting, but I haven't seen it. I think that there's, at least with the title being incorrect, there's a possibility of an error with noticing.
I'm just going to comment. We have got to figure this out. This is now the number what bill where we have had a problem with the title change and then noticing, and this is getting ridiculous. We've got to fix this. So that's just an aside. I don't know what we do about what's happening here tonight. It is on the agenda. I am not aware of whatever happened to quality of life. So
We passed it as amended at quality of life. That was confirmed.
yeah, but I don't know what. And I guess that's the other thing is like, this raises all kinds of questions, because if you have an amendment that changes the title, shouldn't the amendment change the title as well? And it didn't?
Madam Chair, the amendment actually started in BPAC and it was under some pretty heavy discussion. I think it was overlooked that the title needed to change as well.
Okay, well, BPAC is fine, but they're not the ones who actually adopt the amendments, and they're advisory. I don't know what we do here.
So I believe that because it has passed quality of life, it will move on to governing body regardless of what we do here. So
Yeah.
even if we are unable to vote.
Well, this is a problem. I don't want to hold it here because I don't want to prolong it. And this is something that can get fixed. I don't know. We could move it forward without recommendation, I guess. And if that's not allowable because of an Open Meetings Act, then whatever happened to quality of life should still stand. Shouldn't it? And in order for it to pass governing body, there's going to have to be another amendment, which can be done at governing body to fix the title.
Madam Chair, without having had a lot of time to research it, I think that's correct. I believe that would be
I
right.
mean, it's probably the path of least problems.
Quick question though. So if this has been noticed, it has been noticed incorrectly. So now it does something needs to happen for it to be renoticed. So am I correct that the amendments that we passed with it at quality of life should have triggered the change in the caption? It just didn't happen. So now we'll have to make sure that it is noticed correctly with the correct caption, which means we're probably not hearing it until the governing body meeting on the 25th.
I believe that's correct, Madam Chair. Counselor, and I can consult with our legislative affairs staff before next week's governing body meeting to determine what needs to occur before then.
Yeah, that's why passing it without recommendation is probably the easiest thing to do. I don't know that we can't not act on it. Is the problem, and I don't want to hold it because then yes, Councilor Garcia, you're a co-sponsor or a main sponsor or the sponsor with the co-sponsor on the committee.
Given that it seems like it's not ready to be heard on the 11th and it's more than likely to be heard on the 23rd. I guess my question revolves around the noticing of the legislation and having a correct title. Can it be noticed with the incorrect title? Because if it can't, we can postpone a decision, bring it back to this committee with the amendments to correct the title, then send it to governing body.
Counselor, I believe that the amendments that we passed at quality of life should have triggered a correction in the caption. Am I correct? Is that what you were?
I don't think
did we
that
not?
was part of the amendment package from what I recall. So
That's the problem.
yeah, I think that was
But I hear what you're saying. So the problem is that even if we pass it without recommendation,
it goes to governing body.
and it can't go to governing body because it has to be noticed and the notice, and that's a very good point.
Can we refer it to Public Works Utilities and then you can bring an amendment for it then, and then it will make it be able to be noticed faster? Because we can't notice it to quality of life because that's tomorrow and we don't have enough
But
time.
here's the problem. You'd have the same problem there that you have here, which is that it's being you're saying, the city attorney's office is saying that the fact that it was noticed incorrectly for this meeting suggests that you can't act on it here. But the problem is you can't fix it.
Right, so we have to be able to act on it somewhere.
Yeah, so
So we can either refer it to Public Works. Utilities or
I think we just hold it here and fix it here. Are you all right with that?
when it gets there.
And we can work with the city attorney's office to create that amendment, and if it's delayed, it's delayed. I mean, it's not ideal, but hey.
Yeah, but
That's to untangle it.
yeah, but we've got to fix this title problem we've been having. Okay, is there a motion?
Motion to postpone this until the next Finance Committee meeting,
January 17th.
January 17th Finance Committee meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to postpone this item for an amendment until January 17th. I believe we need a roll call.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Rivera, Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes. Okay, that motion passes. Thank you for being here. We have no discussion items. We do not have an executive session. Matters from staff,
No matters from staff. Thank you, ma'am.
matters from the committee. Matters from the chair, our next meeting, Tuesday, January 17th. Thank you, everybody. And if I didn't say it, we're adjourned.